Today I'm speaking with Frank Wright. Frank's very well known for his aircraft rebuilds over the past 2 decades or more, and for his distinctive Frank Wright colour scheme. He's rebuilt over 30 aircraft, including 8 de Havilland Beavers. But what's not quite so well known is he's also had 50 years of adventures and businesses in many areas, including Supercubs, waterskiing, jet boating, helicopters, and ice cream parlours and soup kitchens with his wife Kay. I hope you enjoy this interview. Thanks for making your way down to Koromiko for this.
No problem.
It was nice of you and Kay to make the effort.
Not at all.
And especially thanks for your book draft. I don't know how many people know about the fact that you've written a book, or at least a book draft, but it was a great read, and it's amazing how full and interesting your lives have been. And it was very helpful for this interview, obviously.
Yeah.
Helped with the research. How long did it take you to write that, and is it going to see the light of day in a hard copy?
Well, to answer the last question, is it going to see the light of day? I certainly hope so. In terms of how long it took to write it, probably over about 4 years. I'd get stuck into it, and then I'd sort of lose interest a bit, or something would interrupt it. But no, it really the book idea was purely to put down. Every time we went to a family or friendly gathering, people would say, "You should write that down." I'd tell a story, and it got to the stage where I thought, well, I better make a start. So
yeah,
that's really how it came about. And it was more for family and friends to confirm the things that I'd said and when talking to them, and so just getting it on paper was the main idea.
No, it's great. I certainly hope it does see the light of day.
Yes, well, I'm really getting to the stage where I've either got to get a publisher to do something with it, and I've had the draft proofread by a lady in Tauranga, and she was critical of a couple of things that I was saying, mainly to do with privacy and other things, and
the odd swear word here and there.
Swear word she wasn't too fussed on, but
no, I think you've got to keep the swear words in. It's got to be from you and how words were spoken in the day, I think.
Yeah, well, it's the way everybody talked in those days, and we couldn't string a sentence in all English together without a couple of swear words, it seemed.
Exactly, but it's not like it's extreme.
No, it's not. Yeah. No, but.
These days you're known especially for your aircraft rebuilds, but actually in the big picture of your life, that's just one, I wouldn't say a small chapter, a significant chapter, but it's only one chapter. And there's a quote or a line at the end of your book, we'll call it your book, that said, "There's still so much to do and so little time." But reading your book, you've done so much already, probably a lot more than most people in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And many jobs that you did, especially in the early days, you had little or no training for, I could make out.
That's pretty right. I mean, the sojourn into the Pacific, and particularly New Guinea, I was hired up there to be a caterpillar mechanic, and I only knew how to spell caterpillar. That was about all. And luckily, the guy who talked me into going up there, he said, "Well, I'll be working nearby, so if you get stuck, and I'll help you out." So that took me in quite good stead for other ventures where I was also masquerading as a caterpillar mechanic.
There was another one where you were doing electrical engineering on a prawn trawler. And I don't think you knew much about that either, did you?
No, well, I didn't know anything about that. I got talked into getting on this prawn trawler by a mate who was an auto electrician who was having trouble with alternators and stuff on this boat. And these two Kiwi guys who claimed to be the best cray fishermen north of Auckland, they talked me into going with them, going up to the Gulf of Carpentaria to go prawning. But man, it turned out my wife knew more about the boating than these guys did, and we were very lucky not to sink the thing. We got caught out off Malulabar there one time, and if I'd got seasick and I'm sort of laying in the bilges feeling really crook and So I thought I'd better get up and check on these two Dodgers. And when I got there, neither of them was there. They were both laying in their bunks crook as well. So
who was driving the boat?
The boat was on autopilot. So we soon disconnected that and turned around. But this was a 70-foot trawler, and we were surfing off the waves. It was pretty bloody frightening,
Yeah.
But yeah, once again, just being able to talk my way into a job that gave me further skills as time went by.
You seem to have a very adventurous sort of a give it a go spirit. Where do you think that came from? Were you like that as a kid, or is that something you developed in your maybe your teenage or early 20s?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I had working class parents, and my dad was a builder. We lived in a place down at Point England in Auckland, and that was a new subdivision that was offered by the government as rental properties for working people, which eventually my mum and dad ended up buying it from the State Advances Corporation. But initially, we were playing in the Tamaki River and going spearing flounder and doing all sorts of outdoor stuff. And that sort of led me to doing all of that stuff that's just a wee bit risque at times, and really enjoyed it. I sort of like to challenge myself a wee bit, I guess.
Yeah. And another thing I noticed in your sort of career, maybe up until the aircraft restorations, is that you always seem to be moving on to something else. You would do something for a few years, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, and then there was another project or another adventure coming on. Was that because you got bored, or you were always looking for something different or a new challenge? Or
well, I guess a little boredom probably came into it, but quite often someone would suggest an idea, or let's do this, and it would sounded pretty exciting compared with what I was actually doing at the time, and I probably was fairly easily led into some of these adventures by guys a bit like myself, and everybody sort of wanted to give it a go. If you thought they could do it, they'd have a go at it,
Because some of them I noticed you had already, you had bought the Piper Cub when you were still doing, was it the jet boating or something else? There was sort of crossovers between them.
There's a lot of crossover there.
Sort of sense that, you're always just into something new.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went. And you're right about the Supercub. I can remember we had a photo taken at Queenstown Airport, and there was in a line, there was Kay, who at that stage had a really nice E-type Jaguar. Next to that was the Piper Supercub, which I just traded on the first helicopter, the B model. Everybody I showed it to said, well, looks like you're doing okay, sort of thing, 2 aircraft and a flash car. But, there was always a bit of borrowing. We did a lot of work with the ANZ Bank over the years, and luckily we were able to make the payments that we said we would. And so when we did need a few bob to buy another helicopter or do something, they were pretty easy to work with, yeah.
And were you scared? Obviously you weren't, but most of us would be too scared to take that financial risk to always go on and get a Super Cub or an E-type Jag or a Hughes 300 or something, because it's such a big risk, and the chances of the venture being successful may not be guaranteed. Did that not seem to worry you?
That didn't really. As long as I could sort of see there was a way out. If for instance, I approached a man named Trevor Gamble, who started the shot over jet, which we're all well known and famous worldwide now. And I approached him when I thought that jet boating looked like a bit of fun, and asked him, would you sell the shot over jet operation to me? And he said, well, yeah, I would. And I said, well, what's involved? And he said, well, I've got the jet boat, and I've got a combi van that we take the people back to town or pick them up from. And that's about it. So, and a trailer for the boat. So anyway, I said to him, well, what do you reckon you want for that show? And he said, I'd take $25,000. Well, I'm talking back in 1973, 4, somewhere around there. And I just laughed at him. I said, you're crazy. Who do you think's going to pay you that sort of money? So I trotted off up to Hamilton Jet in Christchurch, ordered a brand new boat on a trailer with a V8 Monaro engine in the thing, a Holden engine, and put a sign up, jet boat rides pay here, and we were away. So we operated off the Queenstown Pier at the bottom of the the main street there, and we had a lot of fun with that.
$25,000 doesn't sound too bad these days, does it? For
Well,
shot over
I
jet.
can't imagine what Shot Over Jet as a company today is worth. Naita who own it, and they just spend like money like it was water. You know, they just keep throwing money at it. If it needs fix it, go for it. Yeah. So those are the sort of things that I how I got into things. They just came from ideas, and we see if we can make them work. Really,
gave it a go. Yeah. Your life hasn't all been around aviation, but there's been a lot of aviation in it.
Yep.
And I think that came from your uncle. He owned a Moth Miner, was that right?
That's
His
correct.
name was Frank as well?
Yeah, I was named after Frank. He was Frank Edwin, and I'm Frank Robert, both Wrights, obviously. And as a kid growing up, he had a Moth Miner which he kept at a little airfield called Manapouri, which we all now know as Auckland International. And this Moth was in a big wooden hangar with a couple of other small aeroplanes. I can't remember quite what they were. But my recall is that my dad, who was always a keen fisherman, he would go away fishing for a day or so and come back, and he'd get a whole lot of snapper fillets and carefully fillet them up and wrap them up. And my grandfather, he lived at Narrawahia. So Uncle Frank, Dad in the back seat, me on Dad's lap, would fly away with a bundle of snapper fillets and heave them out the window at my grandfather's house. Well, you know, some of them landed in the property, but most landed on the neighbours' roofs and places like that.
Rotten fish.
Yeah, rotten fish. Yeah. So so that was my very early days, particularly with aviation. Anyway, so that was the main introduction. And Uncle Frank went to the States and he bought a couple of Beechcraft Bonanzas, V-tail Bonanzas, and he started a little airline in Nevada. And he had that until he got too old to pass a medical, and he ended up dying up in Nevada. He really liked it up there, and he was the adventurous one. In fact, my mother used to quite often say when I came home with some strange idea, "You're just like your Uncle Frank. He does all this same stuff." And so I was quite proud to be named after Frank, because he always had a flash motorbike, and he always had the best motorbike, or the biggest, and so he was a bit of an idol of mine, really.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that as a kid you walked through piles of war surplus Kitty Hawks and Corsairs, and that must sort of strike a raw nerve now when you think of all those aeroplanes just scrapped.
Well, at Ruakahia, which is the Hamilton, where Hamilton Airport is now, that was a parking ground for all of the aircraft that were still able to be flown back from the Pacific Theatre, and they were stored there. Most of them were full of gasoline, I believe, or full of petrol. But what I remember as a kid, the flaps and ailerons on whichever model airplane I was looking at, because they'd deteriorated so badly in the wind and the Pacific sun, I guess, that they'd sort of rotted and they were hanging down like streamers. And I remember as a little 3-year-old probably walking amongst these things and these streamers blowing in the wind. And that's probably one of my earliest life's recollections, really. But so that was big time, and at the end of the day, they called tenders for them, and a man set up a smelting plant at Hamilton there and just melted the whole lot down, which is today, they're all worth over $1 million a piece in any shape.
Yeah.
But anyway, life goes on.
That was just how it was back then, eh?
That's right. It was just surplus. What are we going to do with these airplanes? Oh, we'll just junk them.
Yeah.
But in fact, in Tauranga there, we've got a museum there, the Society of People, and they actually went to Hamilton Airport and got permission to do a dig to see if they could dig down to where some of the aircraft which had been physically scrapped were buried.
Oh.
And they found some bits and pieces, but nothing that was the start of a project. So,
right.
But they had a good look, and that was done about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. So they're still there under the ground somewhere at Hamilton Airport.
Yeah, the remains of it.
Yeah.
So just going back to your early work career, you left school at 16 and did a sheet metal apprenticeship.
Yeah, having failed school cert.
Right.
Yeah, so. But yes, well, when I was about to leave school, my father said to me, "Okay, I don't mind you leaving school, but you've got to have a trade. I don't care whether you're the butcher, the baker, candlestick maker, but you're going to have a trade." So luckily enough, I had met a guy who worked at Burns and Ferrell. They specialised in stainless steel fabrication in Penrose, and they did a lot of hospital work, like building operating tables and stuff like that. So I got signed on there for a 5-year apprentice, and through being able to work overtime on the weekends and in the evenings during the week, I knocked that apprenticeship over in just over 4 years, 4.5 years. So I'm standing there with the trade certificate in my hand, and I really only very briefly ever worked as a stainless steel sheet metal worker in my whole life.
That was what I was going to say. You never went back to
No.
that career, but I guess the mechanical skills you've used all your life.
Well, it taught me how to use my hands, really, and all of the tradesmen were old men to me as a young 16-year-old, and they'd tell you something and you didn't know whether they were having you on or not. Some of these old guys, but man, they taught us a lot, they really did.
And about the same time, you also did some flying lessons.
Yes, that's right. Well, once again with the trade. At the end of my trade, we were down in making wine vats for McWilliams Wines down in Napier, and we were staying at I think it's called the South Shore Hotel, just across the road from the airport. And every morning there was a guy who was a top dressing pilot, and he would go charging through the place with the paper under his arm and head off down, and next thing you'd hear this Fletcher crank up and away he'd go. In fact, he was probably using beavers back then. But anyway, so I got further with the flying bug, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something with it. This is a good time to do it. So I joined the Napier Aero Club, and a guy named Eddie Collett, who I don't know whether Eddie's still flying, he became a senior Air New Zealand captain. He was my instructor. And I soloed in a Piper Colt. And I got about 3/4 of the way through the private pilot license, and then some other thing attracted my attention, and probably about when I went off to Australia.
Yeah.
So
that was the start of the looking for something better.
That's right. Yeah.
So you went to Australia to work in your grandfather's real estate business, which didn't work out.
No.
But then it seems you did quite a few fairly random sort of jobs, but all very interesting. So one of the first ones, you did a bit of boat building on the Gold Coast, and then you did some water ski instructing.
That's right. Well, because my father had always been in boats and was always repairing boats, I had a little bit of an idea about woodworking, not a lot, but anyway, I managed to talk my way into a job, and they were building an 18-foot plug so they could take fiberglass molds off this plug, and they were having trouble with trying to get the concave face of the bow sorted out. And I remember Dad cutting strips of plywood and laying them out one piece at a time to actually achieve that curve. And I sort of said, well, why don't we try this, to the guy? And it was a bit of a breakthrough. So that really cemented my supposed ability, and
you
so
must
they
have
offered
had
me
the
a full-time job.
Did you have the gift of the gab for talking yourself
I wouldn't have liked to
things?
describe myself as that, but I might have had some success in that area. Yeah.
And you had obviously done some water skiing back in New Zealand.
I'd learned to water ski on Lake Taupo behind a 15 horsepower outboard. I don't even know how a 15 horsepower outboard would pull you out of the water. But
yeah, well, that was a question I was thinking of last night, because there weren't big powerful outboards back then.
No.
For
100. Well, I did a bit of skiing at the Surfers Paradise Garden ski show, and they had boats with twin 100-horse Mercuries on the back.
Okay.
And they were just rocket ships compared with it. I mean, they'd pull 20 skiers out of the water, on double skis. So we did a bit of skiing in the show and whatever, and then that sort of became that came to mundane, just regular old skiing and doing jumps and stuff and tricks. And then someone suggested we saw a clip on a place in Florida where they were teaching people how to ski on their bare feet. And we thought, well, we'll give that a go. But we didn't really have too much other than these big show boats to pull this with. And all we knew is you had to go fast. And man alive, we took some falls when we were trying to learn how to do that.
Wow.
But,
So that was all self-taught.
pretty much, yeah, learning by our mistakes. But
Yeah.
when you're doing, probably 40 mile an hour on the water and you do a face plant, it really hurts.
Yeah, and there's some great photos you were showing me last night of starting off on your back
Yeah,
and
that's
sort
right.
of with your feet up in the
Yeah,
air.
we managed to learn to start off a jump start off a pontoon, and then we what we called a deep water start,
Yeah.
where you really had to be able to hang on for what seemed like forever till you popped out of the water. But yeah, we just taught ourselves that, and quite often we'd go 2 or 3 boats. We'd go up the Brisbane River, and we would ski there all day, have a barbecue in the evening, and go home. But no one had put a ski on. Everybody was on bare feet, and so skiing on boards was old news at that stage. Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad bought this crappy old boat with a 40 horsepower Gale Buccaneer engine. Very old thing with, completely gutless. And to start off water skiing, we had to be sitting in a chair in the water, because it couldn't drag you out.
No, that's right. Yeah, no.
Yeah. And then there was the electrical work on the prawn trawler that you mentioned. I think you said you got stuck on the mud in the Brisbane River on that trip
that's right.
too.
On the first night, where we got the boat all the eggs and butter and all the supplies organised, and the boys said, "Well, we'll go out. We'll go out tonight because it's high tide." And the Brisbane River had a lot of sandbanks in it. Well, we only went 4 or 5 miles down the Brisbane River, and we ran aground when the tide now was falling. So we had to spend a whole tide, which was like 6 hours each way, sitting there waiting to float this thing off. So I just wondered about these 2 guys from that point onward.
Yeah.
And I was right.
Yeah. Then you came back to New Zealand and did a year on the Manapouri hydro scheme on the Wanganella.
I did, yeah. We were living on the Wanganella, which was permanently moored at Deep Cove, and they were building a hydro scheme, as most people know, from Manapouri to there. But I was standing in a pub in Queenstown one day, and there was an American guy walked in the bar, and he was talking to all the local boys, and they were looking for workers. And I said, well, I'm doing nothing. What could I do? And they put me in charge of a pump station at the low point in the channels in the tunnel. So the tunnel came downhill for about 5 miles and then uphill for the last mile into the Sound. So at that low point, there was a pump station with 3 big Caterpillar engines that were running water pumps. And the idea was if the electrical pumps failed, we could start these diesel cats and pump the water out. And there was only one time that the water level started coming up to where we sort of lived in this pump station, because there was a major electrical failure. But yeah, it was exciting work, but the pay was great, and of course you're locked away there on the Wanganella, and long as you didn't spend too much on booze, you could come away with a few bob in your pocket.
Yeah, and quite nice to be part of that huge.
It was a big
scheme in
project,
New Zealand, eh?
Well, I can remember that the story was that once we've completed that hydro scheme, it would supply New Zealand with power forever. And of course, as soon as it started generating power, they sent most of it off to TY Smelter, and TY Smelter is still probably the biggest user of power from the Manapouri scheme. So yeah, but that's politicians for you, really.
Yeah. And then it was off to PNG to do the Caterpillar.
More Caterpillar training. That's right. Yes.
But a couple of interesting things you mentioned there was finding the Japanese war relics.
Well, yeah, that was just stuff everywhere. We were building a road from a place called Kamusi, which is a river, up to Kokoda, which the now famous Kokoda Trail, where the Aussies held back a Japanese charge there for many days and on hugely outnumbered odds. But this road we were putting through had to keep crossing creeks and rivers, and so we were continually having trouble with keeping the machinery. Half the brakes wouldn't work because they were always wet, and some of the trucks were old Thames Trader tipping trucks, and they had a crushing plant, and so the trucks would bring boulders and stuff, tip them into the crushing plant, and then obviously that would become the gravel for the road. But the native boys who all drove the tipping trucks, every now and then one of them be backing up to the dump for the crusher and jump on the brakes, nobody home, truck, everything, including the rocks, is into the hopper, and it would take a week to extract the darn thing out of there. But so there was always plenty to do.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing was we kept coming across piles of bicycles. The Japanese figured there was a road going from where they landed in Buna and headed on inland. They were of the impression that there was a road to Port Moresby. So they all arrived carrying a bicycle. And of course, when they figured, well, there's no road, they just threw them in heaps. And they were still laying there in the jungle. Every now and then the surveyors would come across something, a machine gun nest or something with all the cartridges and everything still laying there. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
And this was in the late 60s, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's 25 years later.
Yeah.
Amazing they hadn't rotted away.
Yeah.
And did you say there was a P40 there?
There was. Just the little township of Popondetta, the main activity of that area was growing coffee. And a lot of the Aussie servicemen, as they came home, and Australia was running Papua New Guinea at that stage, they would grant them these blocks, and the idea was that they would start coffee plantations, and so just in behind Popondetta Township, a guy came to me one day and he said, "Oh, you want to go and have a look at something?" And he had stumbled on this P40, which had come off the end of the strip and had just plomped into a swamp. And at that stage, if I'd known what I know today, I wouldn't have left there until the whole thing was on a trailer and heading home.
And it was quite intact, was it?
Well, pretty much, yeah. It was obviously damaged, and most of the damage had been people had smashed the glass, the perspex windows where they could, and just silly people just wrecking stuff.
Yeah.
And the natives would quite often cut a piece of aluminium out and beat it into the shape of a spoon or something, and use it for that. But
I guess someone's taken the aeroplane away.
Yeah, well, that aeroplane ended up going to the States. Yeah, somebody came and did a deal with some of the natives and got it away.
Yeah.
But of course now there's still a bit of stuff up there, I understand, but they've put a moratorium on it. They won't let anyone touch it anywhere now. But just laying everywhere, that sort of thing. Tanks and trucks and all sorts. Yeah.
Amazing, eh? Then it was Tunisia.
Yeah,
was that a fun trip?
Well, the trip wasn't much, but back to New Zealand from New Guinea, and suddenly on the Brisbane paper, one day there's a thing looking for heavy machinery mechanics to work in North Africa for a company named Western Geophysical. They were looking for oil, and they were the system they were using. They had 3 or 4 trucks, I think 4, and underneath them they had a big propane pan that was lifted on hydraulics, and it was under the truck, and they would in a line march on a surveyed line, and the trucks would stop. They'd put the pans down. They'd fill these pans with LPG. And then a control vehicle, once the control vehicle had everybody set up, he would fire the thing remotely, and these explosions would go off. And the idea was they'd create like a mini earthquake along this surveyed line, so they could tell by the reactions from all the geophysical stuff that they had laid out, which was an ideal place to perhaps drill a well or drill a hole and see if there's any oil there. But it was a strange coming from New Guinea into what was a desert, where by midday it was like 50 degrees in the Sahara Desert, and at night time you put a glass of water outside. That we were living in caravans, and you put a glass of water outside, and it would have a frozen crust on it in the morning. So 2 extreme temperatures. And so how we ever got anything done in the heat, it just used to knock you around something terrible.
Yeah.
But the big problem was the guy who was running the show, unfortunately, he had a bigger bent towards alcohol than anybody else did, and he was pissed by 11 o'clock every day. So unless you had something to do for the day that you could get into it and do it under your own steam, if you were waiting on him, nothing would happen. And I was contracted there for 2 years, and after just coming up the first year, I went on leave up to London, and we went and saw the Western Geophysical crowd and said, this is not working. And so in the end, they just flagged it away. we stayed there. I had another Kiwi guy with us. And they said, well, would you like to go and work on a rig out in the North Sea? Oh, well, yeah, I suppose so. That was something different. So they flew us in this big ass helicopter. I don't know what sort of helicopter it was now. We flew out to this rig, landed out there, and this thing, the whole rig was covered in about 2 inches of ice. And they just had a storm go through them. This Kiwi guy and I looked at each other and says, this looks like something you want to do. We both said no. So we got back in the helicopter and went back to Aberdeen, I think we went out of. And
so even Frank Wright's got limits as
he
to
did
what
on
he'll
that,
go and do.
Especially having just come out of the Sahara Desert. Just ice everywhere didn't look very appealing, really.
Yeah. And then there was a mission doing a road trip in California. And that sounds quite interesting. You sort of built yourself a 65 Mustang convertible.
Yeah, well, what had happened, we were driving around in a place called North Hollywood, which obviously is near Hollywood. And on the side of the road was a 64.5 Mustang convertible, horrible sort of a green color, and had a sign on it, for sale. No, it didn't say for sale. Had $300 blown motor, or words to that effect. And so we went and had a look at the thing, because we'd just come, being Kiwis, and my mate was an Aussie, and where you'd pay $10,000 or $12,000 for a Mustang convertible in Auckland. And so we thought, oh, hell, this looks like. So we had a look at it. Sure enough, the engine was stuffed. Went round to the local wreckers, bought a complete engine out. We had to lift it out of a wrecked car, and I think we paid something like $25 or something for this thing. And on the side of the road in North Hollywood, we took one engine out, put the other engine back in, got it going. And then Ray and I drove this thing all over California, had a great time in this car. And of course, the first 3 or 4 days with this, the hood had to be down. And as it got colder and colder, they sneak the hood up every day and say, you want the hood up today? Nah, I don't think so. And 10 minutes later, we stopped putting the hood up because it was getting cold. So we're a bit spoiled there. But Ray, when we parted ways, Ray decided he wanted to go to Florida, and I was sort of heading in another direction at that stage. And so he jumped in this thing. He drove it right across the States and ended up in Florida with it for a couple of years. Wow. I don't know what happened at the end of the day, but I lost contact with Ray.
Great Florida car.
Yeah, great Florida car, yeah.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, so that was another little thing that interrupted us, yeah.
Yeah. And then you sort of made your way back, or started to make your way back to New Zealand, but you got stuck in Hawaii for quite a long time.
Yeah, I did.
And sort of seemed to me that sort of kick-started the rest of your life, really. Would that be right? I mean, you got back into flying, got the 206. It sort of started all the things that you've continued on doing.
Yeah. Well, the reason I know when I decided to go home, I thought, well, I'll stop in Hawaii, because I had a mate there who was running a hotel, and the Ilokai Hotel, which is one of the big hotels on the front by the beach. And so I called in to see Peter, and he said, oh, you should stay here, or, you'll find a job. And I said, well, how am I going to get a job? And he said, well, you've got to have a social security card. And what you do is you go down to the post office and you fill out a form, and you take that up to the lady at the desk, and she'll start typing away there. And this has all happened, and this woman says to me, she said, oh, how come you haven't had a social security card till you're 30 or whatever I was? And I said, oh, well, I've been going to college in England. And she said, oh, I detected a bit of an accent there. And so anyway, out came a social security card. So I've still got that social security card. But
really?
Yeah, and everything, including my pilot's license, has had the same number on it.
I wouldn't let Trump see that.
No, I wouldn't do that. I didn't know whether I should tell you or not, actually.
Yeah.
But, so that allowed me to stay. So first of all, I got a job at a restaurant across the street, and I was a busboy. And a busboy in America, for those that don't know, is your job is to make sure everyone's got a glass of water in front of them, and when they're finished eating, you clear the table and set it up for the next patrons. So that lasted about 3 or 4 weeks, and then the owner of the hotel was also the owner of one of the TV stations. A very wealthy fellow. He came in one day and he said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Well, yeah, I really need someone as a shift manager. And I thought maybe I watched you working and you seem to know what you're doing. And so anyway, he made me a shift manager. Well, about another 3 weeks later, I'm the general manager of the whole joint.
Wow.
Mainly because they turned over staff like crazy. People would come and work for a week and then want to go and sit on the beach. So it was pretty hard keeping a full crew there. But yeah, so that got me into the catering game, if you like.
And you started flying again in Hawaii?
Yeah, I went down to Honolulu Airport, International Airport, and went to a Cessna dealer there. What do you call AAA Aviation was the name, a guy named Bob Fraker, and got a job there, just washing airplanes, putting fuel in them, cleaning up the vomit from the instrument panel from the last student, and all the shit jobs that nobody else wanted to do. And while I was doing that, they let me continue with my flying, and I was getting a 150 Cessna for $7 an hour. And so I soon cranked up enough hours to finish my private license. And then I started on a commercial, and then I did an instrument rating. And it was during that transitioning period that I ended up buying the 206, which had unfortunately been flipped on its back in a storm. And Roger Hewitt, another Kiwi guy who was already working up there, looking after aircraft in the maintenance space. And we rebuilt this Cessna to the point that we eventually flew it home, and it's still flying around the skies of New Zealand right now under a new registration.
I think you mentioned that the flying training you were doing was right in the middle of Pearl Harbor.
It was, yeah. Well, when one of the places that we used to take our students to do circuits, obviously the International was real busy, and although it's right alongside Pearl Harbor in a way, we would just do circuit training on what they call Ford Island, which is an island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. But the point I think that I was making to you was that the result of the Pearl Harbor attack was still all laying there. All the ships or parts of the ships that they hadn't salvaged were all laying in the harbour. There was oil pouring out of all of them, and
that
nobody
must have been pretty surreal, just flying with that under you.
Yeah, and even there's a couple of big hangars on the island there and a control tower left over from those war days, and there was bullet holes and pieces of the building missing when they really had to have battering there. But from a historical point of view, it was an interesting place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, the Vietnam War was in full cry when this was going on, and so it'd be nothing to be lined up in a Cessna 150 with an ab initio student, and on the parallel runway there's a flight of 4 Phantoms cranking up going off to Vietnam. So it was a real mix of airplanes.
Yeah, and here's this little Kiwi boy.
Yeah, just living the dream,
with
really.
a social security number.
Yeah, living the dream.
Yeah. So you and Roger Hewitt, he was Bill Hewitt's son, right?
Correct. Yeah, Bill Hewitt,
the famous Bill Hewitt.
That's right. He was based in Mosburn in Southland, and he was one of the very early pioneers of the 180s, doing general charter, and they did quite a lot of dropping poison for rabbits, which were in plague form around Otago in those days.
And then Hewitt Aviation.
Hewitt Aviation, which was was a charter business, I guess. And he did a lot of flying to and from Big Bay and other places on the West Coast. So Roger was his son, so he came from an aviation background. So he knew at that stage more than me about aircraft maintenance. Yeah.
Right. So you and him bought this Cessna 206, which had been damaged in an accident, had it? Or
it got blown upside down on the island of Maui, and just in a windstorm. Guy was taxiing it and just got caught and blew over on his nose, or landed right upside down, broke the fuselage just behind the cabin, and so we figured that we saw it come up for tender. The tender price we paid was $2,000 from memory. And so then we had to recover it back from Maui back to Honolulu. And we managed to talk a guy there that had a C-46, which is slightly bigger than a DC-3 aircraft. He flew us all over there with a bit of gear, and we took the thing apart and stuffed it inside this big aeroplane, and he took it back to Honolulu for us.
Wow, what a mission.
Yeah, it was a mission, yeah. And we got it, and we took the whole lot of it up onto the second floor of this big original wartime hangar, and Roger and I spent probably a year and a half rebuilding the thing.
Okay.
Which was a big learning curve for me.
And you were still flying instructing at the time?
Yes, I was still paying my wages, doing a bit of flying and looking after the aircraft and stuff, yeah.
But that was obviously the start of your aircraft rebuilding career.
Pretty much. It was it was the first aeroplane I had anything to do with in terms of sheet metal and repair, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
It was good.
Great project.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And, of course, eventually we got it going, and we're using it around the islands, and then I decided to come home, and Roger wanted to stay there initially, and so I started gearing the thing up, got a tank made for the interior, and we ended up with something like 200 gallons in the cabin.
So you were going to ferry it
the
all
idea
the way back?
Yeah, I planned on flying it home by myself. And then at the very last minute, Rogers decided he'd come with me, which was great because then I had another pair of hands to. Roger was a private pilot at that stage. He's since become commercial, but so it was good to have someone come along. But we had to because now we had two up front instead of one. We had to move the tank around a bit because the CFG was right on the aft limits. And in fact, when we taxied out to take off on our trip from Honolulu, heading for the Marshall Islands, was at midnight one night, because I can't remember why we did that, probably because it was cooler. And the aeroplane kept sitting its bum on the runway, on the taxiway, so we had to keep prodding the brakes to keep the tail in the air. So we were waiting for a truck with a flashing red light to come over and say, "What the hell are you guys doing out there?"
I was thinking, back in those days without email and WhatsApp and the internet, planning for a trip like that must have been pretty challenging, was it? I mean, I jotted down a few things. Navigation, you only had a couple of ADFs.
Correct, yep.
Ferry tanks, getting fuel en route at the Pacific Islands on the way. I'm sure you'll talk about all these. How long was each leg? Communication along the way. Did you have an HF? Or
we had an HF.
Oh, you did? There's a story about that. A massive logistical headache, really, but I suppose it was fun planning it, wasn't it?
Well, it was, yeah, it certainly was. I guess because I was flying day and night over the water around the islands in Hawaii. Being over the water didn't freak me out like it does today. I get the shakes crossing Cook Strait now, but in those days, and we'd talk to all the ferry pilots who were streaming through Hawaii, going to Australia and New Zealand, some of them, and trying to learn how you could read the waves, and we didn't have the modern gear where you can just push a button and it'll tell you what your drift angle is compared with the wind or whatever. We had just those two ADFs. We carefully planned our trip. We had charts that we'd set up, ruled, and the ferry pilots all said to us, "Whatever you do, just do your flight plan and stick with it. Don't try and outguess the wind, because at 6,000 feet the wind might be blowing one way, and on sea level it might be blowing the opposite direction." He said it's really weird, especially through the convergence zone, near the equator. So anyway, we figured we knew what we were doing at that stage. So
and did you ship fuel to the islands?
We organised for fuel, 2 drums of fuel to firstly be placed at Majuro in the Marshall Islands, which was our first stop, and that was 14 and a half hours from Honolulu to Majuro. 14 and a half hours. So we landed with about 3 hours fuel there, I do recall.
So just going back a step. When you said you left Hawaii, this is July 73, you were overloaded by 1,100 pounds, and it took an hour and a half to climb to 6,000 feet.
Yeah, We just about cleaned all the approach lights out on the longest runway in Honolulu International Airport.
Were you worried at that point
Oh,
or not?
shit, yeah. Well, we were committed then. I mean, when, we were only just clearing these approach lights. I mean, it was dark, obviously, nighttime, but the lights were all turned on. And we weren't even going to make a turn to go back. The thing we just didn't want to do it. And anyway, we just persevered. And then once we burned our way through the first hour and a half of fuel, then we could start climbing. And we did most of the trip at about 6,000 feet, because that was the best fuel burn, and that's where the winds were more favourable.
So that first leg was to Majuro.
Majuro in the Marshall Islands, yeah. And so anyway, we arrived there thinking, that was lucky, wasn't it? Gee whiz, aren't we clever? And then we started looking around for our drums of fuel. Well, apparently the guy who was the stevedoring, he said, yep, that boat came with those drums of fuel, but they forgot to put them on the wharf, and now that boat's gone somewhere else. But don't worry, it'll be back in a month. And we're going, shit, we don't want to stay here for a month. This is a godforsaken place. It was the Majuro's on an island that's a strip. You could throw a stone from one side to the other with, and hit the water both times. It's just a long, big curved strip, and full of alcoholic expatriates, Americans. And just about everybody seemed to have a bloody drinking problem there. It was just nuts. Anyway, so we think, right, we're stuck. What are we going to do? So we wandered around there, and down on one of the edge of the lagoon, there was an old fellow there, and he was supposedly restoring a Grumman widgeon. So we got yarning to this old bloke and told him what our predicament was, and he said, oh, I've got some fuel, might do that job for you. So I go around by the back of the hang, and there's these drums of fuel, and they're all rusty and everything. And it was a strange octane, I think 140, 145 or something like that, and it was purple in colour. So we opened up a drum and tipped some in a bucket and had a look at it and sniffed it and tasted it and lit a fire with it, and it did all the sort of normal things. So we thought, oh, it must be all right. So we put 40 litres, I think 40 litres, something like that, in the aeroplane and went flying around the island and never missed a beat. So, oh, shit, good, that's good. So we landed, we did a deal on that fuel with this old fella and filled her up to the brim and headed off then for Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. And that was only about a 7-hour leg from memory.
Only?
Only? Yeah. Well, it was short after 14 and a half anyway. Yeah. So anyway, we plopped in there, and that was full of Kiwi expatriates for some reason. There was a guy there, two guys actually, flying an Islander, and so they made us pretty welcome. So we stayed there about 4 or 5 days and did a lot of diving on wrecks, and of course there was a huge battle over the island of Tarawa during the war too. So the stuff in the lagoon, we found a big 4-engine bomber type. I couldn't tell you today what breed it was, but it was splattered into the water. It was only in about 20 feet of water at the deepest part. And so we dived on that, and we were finding cartridge shells. And the only interesting thing I found was a fob watch, which unfortunately, been there for 40 odd years. It had corroded. And but I had that for years, and then one day a nephew wanted to take it to school for show and tell, and about his great uncle Frank. And anyway, unfortunately, it went missing at that point, so I lost it. But,
wow. So that's Kiribati.
Kiribati, yeah, they call that Kiribati now, or Kiribati, yeah. Spell it Kiribati.
Didn't you land with the HF antenna out on one of those landings?
I was hoping you wouldn't mention that, really. That's a bit of a faux pas. Yeah, well, we were so pleased to have arrived. I've probably gone a bit far forward here. The problem with this fuel that we've tanked up with in Majuro is that when it was exposed to the air, there was some kind of algae started forming in it. And in the Cessna 206, in the floor, you've got 2 little reservoirs, one on each side of the aeroplane. And what was happening, this algae was coming through, and every now and then it would block and inject it just momentarily. So the engine would drop a cylinder, and and
this was several hours out.
Yeah, I can swim pretty good, but not that far. And yes, so it would miss a cylinder for a while, and we'd both sort of sit up straight. Mixture fully rich, what's happening. Okay, and so it settled down again. This happened all the way to Tarawa, basically. So we're so bloody pleased to get there. We finally shot it, went into this island, landed there, and that was lucky, bloody hell, what are we going to do now? But unfortunately, because we were so excited to have finally made it that far, we forgot to wind in the trailing antenna, which obviously hooked in a bloody great palm tree or something, and there was this crash down the back of the airplane. Christ, what's that? Doesn't matter. We're on short finals and landed, and that's what had happened. It had ripped the box and everything from which was just behind the tank, and it roared off the back. And when it got to the rear bulkhead, was the loud crash when it broke the wire.
So that was the end of the HF.
That was the end of the HF as well. Yeah. Well, the HF bloody antenna part of it, anyway. Yeah. But no, we had a good time in Taro. I wouldn't have mind going back there, as a visitor today to see what's there now. But I'm sure it's changed.
And did you have any navigation issues, or did that?
No. Well, the only thing that confused us a wee bit is this is something that the ferry pilots told us. They said, look, you'll see you'll look over there and you'll see a cloud, and underneath it you can see an island, and so you just got to be careful. You don't go wandering over there to see what that is. Just keep your course, but just remember where you last saw that place. And we're flying along there, and I said to Roger, there's an island over there, and there was no island marked on the chart. And he said, oh shit, you're right. And we both stared at this thing, and I said, I can see a boat. And he said, whereabouts? I said, up there. Oh, yeah, I think we can too. And this went on for about a quarter of an hour. So we kept chugging on and doing where we were supposed to be headed. And then finally, it turned out it was a shadow on the water. But the mind convinces you that what you're looking at is an island under that cloud.
It's like a mirage.
Yeah. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And especially as we got closer to Tarawa, our ADFs, were supposed to come in at 300 miles, but the only one that did that was when we left Honolulu. We were able to backtrack 200 miles out of there, but down in the middle of the Pacific, the ADFs were pretty unreliable, if that's the word. So we were sitting there and we had these 2 ADFs on board, and every now and then one of the needles would spin right around and the other one would spin the other way, and oh shit, what's going on here? So we just plodded on, and then next thing in front of us, here was the island. We were there. But yeah, I would hardly cross Cook Strait on a bad day on an ADF today, I tell you what.
But most of the trip was dead reckoning.
Dead reckoning.
Yeah, it must have worked out.
Yeah. I guess the problem was that whilst we had on board, we had a raft, 2-man raft, and all the gear, a water maker and bits and pieces that we managed to wangle from an American serviceman who had control of that stuff, and he gave us a lend of that. And so we figured if we did go in, well, hopefully somebody come looking for us. But no beacons in those days, You'd be shit lucky to be picked up. And we flew for all those hours. I think it was a total of nearly 40 hours. We never saw a ship, and yet we were crossing all of the main shipping channels, and never, because we thought, there'll be a ship there, and one over there, and one over there. And it wasn't until we got close into the islands where you had guys in fishing boats just fishing offshore. And we'd crossed all those major shipping lanes, but never saw a bloody ship. So
amazing.
Not quite sure what was going on there. Yeah, so anyway, when we got to Tarawa, we drained all the fuel out of the aircraft, but we didn't take the 2 reservoirs out of the floor, because it would have meant basically dismantling the whole bloody airplane to get the floor up. And so we drained everything we could get out of it, and we put fresh fuel in it. And once again, we did some circuits, and everything was fine, no problem at all. And then so we headed off to Fiji, which is the next leg, and that was about another 6 hours, I think. And then we did a bit of a dog leg round 2 little islands. One was called Rotuma, and I think the other one was Funafuti, I think, and then into Nandi. And while I'd always, living in New Zealand, heard about this Fijian palm trees and white sand and coral and beautiful place. Well, we arrived in Nandi and it was full of people from India and running everything, and the Fijians were all sitting under a palm tree in the sun, and the Indians were doing all the work, making all the money. So we weren't very enamoured with Fiji, so we only stayed there one night and buggered off to Auckland the next day. So, but it was all part of the big exercise.
Yeah. So once you got it to New Zealand, the plan was to put it on floats and run a commercial tourist business out of Queenstown. Was
Correct.
that
That's
correct?
that was the plan of actually taking the thing home to New Zealand, was to put some floats under it and put a sign up in Queenstown Bay and Frank's joyrides pay here sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we, at that point, ran into something called air service licensing, which was a government department who, when you decided you want to start an aerial service aircraft aviation business, you would make application to this board. They would seek objections from all and sundry, and they would study this application and either grant it or not grant it, depending on what they thought about you. So we got a lawyer who seemed to know what he was doing, and we got to court, and Mount Cook Airlines, who had the licenses for float planes in those days, but weren't operating them, they came to court with their lawyers and objected strongly to the fact that this bloody upstart was going to start a float plane service out of Queenstown Bay that we started and we held the licenses for, but we didn't operate because we couldn't make any money. So how was this guy going to make any money? And anyway, unfortunately, the judges agreed that they were probably right, and they declined the application. So
you got to wonder what their motivation for doing that was, especially the fact that they weren't operating that business at the time.
Yeah, well, that was obviously our argument too. Well, if you're not operating it and the reason is that you couldn't make any money, perhaps you might want to have a look at yourself.
But that was how it was back then, wasn't it?
It was.
It seems like such a foreign concept now.
So anyway, the lawyer who broke us the bad news, and he said, "Oh, well, we should have won that, should have won. We can appeal it if you want it." No, I said, it's been enough money. It cost about $3,000 for him on that first go round. Anyway, a short time later, somehow he talked me into having another go. So before I did that, I went and campaigned all the councillors, or most of the councillors. And Warren Cooper was the mayor in those days. And Warren wrote a glowing letter about, my ability to do this and do that, and a good upstanding citizen and whatever. And so we submitted this next application. And my lawyer stood up and said, "Sir, we've got a letter here from the mayor of Lakes District, and he's recommending this Mr. Wright fellow really well. He knows him known him for a couple of years and whatever." And so the next thing, this woman stands up. She's in the back of the courtroom there, and she said, "Could I speak, Your Honour?" And yes, you can. "Well, I'm the deputy mayor of Queenstown, and I can tell you now that Mr. Wright doesn't have 100% backing for this. In fact, I can name 3 councillors who are objecting to this greatly."
Wow.
I thought, shit.
This was all news to you.
Yeah, this is like fresh news, this one. Even nobody had heard this. So once again, sorry, no go. But it's still based on the same ground that they held the licenses, therefore they could object, and the fact that they weren't using them had nothing to do with it, according to the judge.
Had Mount Cook got under her bonnet? Or...
Yeah, well, it turned out once the whole thing washed up that Mount Cook had put a bloody plane on and flown the whole 3 of them down to the hearing, unbeknown to Warren Cooper. So anyway, so we lost that one. So I'd had enough by that stage, and I thought, right, I'm not going to be a float plane operator anyway, so we'll get rid of it. And while I was building that aeroplane up in Hawaii, a guy named Jack Bindon, who had a flying school at Hamilton, he used to come through there on, I'm not quite sure what but he'd visit us 2 or 3 times in Honolulu. He said, "What are you going to do with this airplane?" "Oh, I'm going to take it back to New Zealand." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to put it on floats." "Oh, okay. Well, if you ever want to sell it, let me know." So this went on and on. And finally, when this blew up, rang him up one day. I said, "Jack, you want to buy that 206? "Yeah, oh, yeah. I said, well, it's for sale. So anyway, we did the deal, and he went away chirpy and happy and started flying it around. And I think it was only something like about 30 hours after he bought it, it bloody knocked the top off a piston. And he got it down somewhere and didn't damage it. But he rang me up and said, that bloody engine just shit itself, And I said, well, it's done a bit of work, that old engine, And
must have been that 140 octane fuel.
Yeah, that's right. So I often wondered whether it was that bloody weird octane didn't set that off, but the top came right off the piston because they're actually spun on a thread on the top of them. It just docked it off, and there's a big dent in the bonnet apparently. Where
off the cylinder, you mean?
Top of the cylinder.
Yeah,
top of the cylinder. Yeah. So that was.
So was that a bit sad getting rid of the aeroplane?
It was, yeah, because I had great visions of this was going to be my career. Having done a bit of flying in Hawaii, I thought I know you can make money at it if you do it right.
And you'd put a bit of blood, sweat, and tears into
it. Yeah. But so anyway, it changed hands after Jack finished with it. It ended up at Mountain Air down at Ruapehu.
Oh, right.
And they flew it for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And it's still flying today, and it's based now, I believe, down in Napier. And I think I showed you a photo last night of it parked outside my hangar with the latest 206 in the background. So
yeah,
just as a comparison, the old and the new, yeah. A grand old aeroplane.
Well, it got you going in life anyway.
It certainly did.
And then there was your plan to buy the shot over jet, which didn't come to fruition, but you started up your own jet boat business. What was the name of that business?
Lazy Bones Jet. Now, people used to, and when I think about it now, I thought, whatever made you think of that name? But the reason was the guy named Alan Pickard, he used to run a jet boat service, the same service that I did basically. And he was called Lazy Bones, and his boat was called Lazy Bones. So I thought, well, people were coming saying, well, where's the Lazy Bones Jet gone? I thought, well, hang on, there's an opening. Somebody remembered that name. So anyway, wrongly or rightly, I called it Lazy Bones Jet. When I sold the business to a fellow named Ross Merritt down in Queenstown, and he changed the name to Kawara Jet.
Right.
And because it was operating off the lake, round down the Frankton Arm, down through the falls and into the Kawara River. And we used to go down as far as Smith Falls, which are down in the gorge, heading down toward Cromwell. It's only as far as you could go with a jet boat. There's quite a big drop off in there.
Yeah. And how did you market that? And were you up in competition with shot over?
Yeah, I was in direct competition with the shot over jet, and I had a sign made up, and I used to put it. I managed to rent one of these dock sites on the main pier right at the bottom of the main street of Queenstown, and there were 4 berths there, and I got the outside left-hand berth, and I was operating from there. I put a sandwich board up with jet boat rides. I used to. It was $3 a head, and it was about a half-hour trip. I'd go out across down Frankton Arm, stop 2 or 3 places, point out things of interest, down through the Kawara Falls, down into the river, stop at the mouth of the shot over, talk about shot over in the gold mining days, and then back. And yet, $3 a head, I could carry 7 passengers, and it was going good. I was making money. So it was good.
Had you done much jet boating before?
None at all.
You must have had an extraordinary amount of self-confidence in yourself. No jet boating, a whole new idea, in competition with a large existing operator, and just go and start this business up yourself.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was the same with the Mount Cook Airlines thing, wasn't it? I mean, I just figured, they're the big boys. I'm a little boy. I'll have a go because, sometimes, a 1 or 2 man band can make money out of jet boating, but if you've got 5 executives on the committee all taking a wage from the operation, then it's pretty hard to make money out of aviation. It can be.
Yeah. So it was a successful business?
Well, it was. It certainly filled the day in. I ran it for 2.5 years, something like that. And then in the end, I put another driver on it because I was playing with helicopters or
The next thing was starting, was it?
Supercubs by this stage. And and anyway, a guy came along one day and he said he wanted to buy the business. And I said, oh, that's fine. So he bought it lock, stock and barrel. And he operated, as I say, he called it Kawara Jet.
Yeah.
And but we made a few bob doing films. We did a lot of filming work where there was boat chases through the willow trees and stuff like that. So there was always something going on. And as a bit of a sideline, I used to do a bit of trout fishing too. So I'd take people to the Lockie River or one of the big streams in Wakatipu, and for fly casting, and then in the evening sometimes, if it was a nice day, I'd take a couple or two couples out on the lake and just stroll up and down by Cecil Peak there and catch a couple of trout.
Okay.
And so there was always something to do, and charter type stuff,
And about this time in late '74, you met Kay, who's your wife now.
I did.
And she was telling quite a funny story about how you met. Are you allowed to say that?
Oh, yeah, I guess I can. I mean, it was a long time ago, and I'm a different person today. But Kay was running, she was working in the public relations office where I was doing my bookings. So the bookings for the jet boat ride, you wanted to make a booking for tomorrow at 10 o'clock. They'd go and they'd start a roster of a trip starting at 10, and they'd try and fill the boat with 7 passengers. And so I had seen her in her office coming and going, and she was looking after all the rental cars for Tasman rental cars. And anyway, I'm walking down the street one day, and she comes running up to me. She says, "Hey Frank, do you want to help? You want to help me rob a bank?" I said, "What? What are you talking about? You want to rob a bank? Come and look at this money." So we walked down the street, and the ANZ Bank had just moved into a new premises there. And on the footpath, on a trolley on wheels, was about 4 stacked about 4 high. Here's this trolley, and it's laden with notes, currency, New Zealand currency, with rubber bands or pieces of paper wrapped around them or something. And there was a guy picking them up by the armful and walking into the bank with them. But while he was in the bank, no one was standing looking after the trolley. and Kay thought that was a perfect opportunity. But when we stood back and analysed it, thought, well, there's only one road out of Queenstown. So if you got away with an armful of money, they're going to have the cops waiting for you at Frankton Junction or at Arrowtown Junction, and you're screwed anyway. So we'll just leave that idea for the time being.
The innocence of 1974.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But that was the start of your relationship.
It was. Yeah. It was. I didn't. When we were talking about this the other day, I didn't say that in front of Kay, but she's heard me say it plenty of times. And the other thing that made me choose her as a partner was the fact that we used to go spotlighting for rabbits, and something to do when the pubs were closed. And another girl who I had a bit of a fancy on at the time was her and Kay were good mates. And anyway, they used to come rabbit shooting with me. But Kay was always better with the spotlight than the other girl was. So I figured she'd probably be a better bet long term, because she could hold a spotlight in a lot better fashion than the other girl.
Sounds like a very wise choice.
So I thought it was grounds for success anyway.
Well, it's worked out. What did you say, 52 years, was it?
52 years this October. So we've done pretty well. That's like 5 life sentences these days, isn't it, really?
No, that's very well done.
Yeah.
And then how did she take to all your schemes, Frank's schemes?
She's never ever actually said no to one of my schemes, but she's always been a good sounding board. I said, "What do you think about this, Kay?" And she'd go away and think about it. Well, she'd come back with all of these fish hooks that I hadn't even seen, And she was always able to analyse it from a totally different perspective. I just wanted this idea. I want to make it happen. How do I get a new jet boat? Where do I get it from? And she's going, whoa.
I have the same thing. This sense of reality is just so frustrating and annoying, isn't it?
Yeah. So, she'd come up with, how are you going to pay for that? I'd say, well, I've got this much in the bank, and then there's this, and the bank said they'll lend me this. And what's the interest rate? Oh, I think it's around about 7% or something. Well, have you tried another bank? You might get a better rate. She'd be able to analyse it to death.
Yeah.
But luckily, at the end of the day, most of those, all of the schemes really, she's sometimes reluctantly has let it go ahead, and as luck would have it, in most cases, it worked out pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. And then with her, there were a couple of ventures. There was a coffee shop called the Coffee Pot,
Yep,
which she managed.
that's correct.
And you had that for a couple of years, and then together you started New Zealand's first ice cream parlour.
Ice cream parlour, that's correct.
Sort of a venture with Tip Top, was that right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
Yep.
well, basically we'd been on holiday up into the States, and there was a Baskin Robbins, I think was the brand name, and it was an ice cream parlour, and they had 31 flavours or something. So anyway, we thought this might work in Queenstown, particularly in the summer, obviously. So we contacted General Foods, which were Tip Top, and said, we've got this idea. How many flavours can you make? And initially they started out, well, you can have vanilla or hokey pokey. It was
Chocolate.
about 3 or 4. And I said, oh, gee, we really need more than that. And the guy said, well, leave it with me. And a few days, weeks later, they came back and said, we can do 21 flavours. I said, right, that's enough. That's
and
good.
this was all from a contact with you who knew presumably nothing about ice cream, just called them up out of the blue, and they decided to.
Yeah, well, I explained the whole plan to them. We had a premises that was being built. We didn't build it, but the developer, we'd talked to the developer, and he said, well, I told him what I was thinking about doing, and so he put our name on that new premises, so it was really set up as an ice cream parlour from day one. So anyway, we set it up, and we had the biggest problem. We had to have quite a lot of freezer space because we always carried enough product for a week, just in case there was the Cora Gorge slipped or something, the trucks couldn't get through or whatever. So away she went, and we would turn the whole stock over sometimes. Virtually in about 5 days, we'd turn the whole stock over. Would be all brand new stuff going through it. So they could hardly keep up with us initially, but once it got going, it went really well.
Yeah.
And so that had Kay busy. Kay kept busy doing that while I was doing other things. And then in the wintertime, she'd turn that ice cream parlour into a soup kitchen. So all the skiers coming off the mountain freezing cold, they'd all come in there, and she'd have 4 or 5 different soups going, and you could have it with bread rolls or whatever you wanted to go with it. So she made a really good go of that as an alternate, a wintertime use, because ice creams weren't big sellers in the winter down there.
Great idea.
Yeah.
And then while you still had the jet boat business running, you bought a Supercub, BRO, Bravo Romeo Oscar.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. And then once you sold the jet boat business, then you were into the hunting and venison recovery with the Cub.
Correct. Yep.
So do you want to just tell me how that came about, how you got the Cub and where that idea came from?
I bought the Cub from a guy in Dunedin whose name escapes me today. But, I ran into a fellow whom you know, Bill Greenslade. He already had a Cub, and he was involved in ground shooting using the Cub to get in and out of the remote valleys and in and around Queenstown. And so I sort of picked his brains for a bit. I knew a little bit about hunting, but only probably as a young fella, teenager. I hadn't shot anything bigger than a rabbit at that stage, I don't think, but... another fellow, Brian McCarthy, who worked for the forestry, he took me out a couple of times ground shooting and spotlighting and stuff. So I got a bit of a taste for it. So I figured that I needed an airplane. So I did know a bit about flying. And so I ended up, everybody else had Super Cubs or Osters in those days. So anyway, I tracked an airplane down and ended up with it back in Queenstown. And then the first place I sort of went hunting was up in the Albert Burn, which used to be a state forest in those days, and its southern boundary is Minaret Station, which is a big station owned by the Wallace family now. So it hadn't really been shot for a number of years. A guy named Alan Duncan from Makarora, he used to shoot that valley regularly. and he'd sort of basically cleaned it out and had gone elsewhere. He'd actually got into helicopters himself. So it was a nice little place for me to go. It wasn't only, 40 minutes from Queenstown Airport, and had a nice little hut there, or a bit of a rough hut, but, comfortable. So I would shoot there in the summer, and as well as all of the shot over catchment, the rees and the dart, Rockburn, Rootburn, all those valleys, and then on the west coast at Big Bay. But the aeroplane primarily used as transport to get into these various areas, and then ground shoot or spotlight, and then obviously throw the carcasses in the back of the cub. You'd get, four smaller hinds in the back of the thing initially, and then as I learned a bit more about the aeroplane, you could sort of get one with the haunches over your shoulders, and you get an extra one in the back of it.
So did you, how did the bush flying sort of go, especially because that was probably a bit new to you? Did you give yourself any scares?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I scared myself a lot initially. Most of the scares came from trying to get airborne, because, I just kept throwing deer in the back of the thing until it wouldn't hold anymore. And then I soon realised that wasn't going to work for long. But the Cub, luckily being a very forgiving aeroplane, I remember, I don't know whether I told you the story about the Cub and the lawnmower. We in the Albert Burn that has a north branch, and it's really a cold, hot, miserable place in the winter, but really good for possums. So one winter, Mac and I, we were talking to Alan Duncan, he actually, that's right, in the summer he took me for a fly, and he flew into the North Branch in the Hiller in those days, and he made an approach to where the strip was as he remembered it, and he said, you come through here, go round this sort of headland and into here, and then the strip is there and it runs to there, sort of thing. And okay, so anyway, I thought, well, we landed there, and the bloody grass was up like 3 foot high, and so I thought, well, we need a lawnmower. So we went back to Queenstown, got a lawnmower organised, borrowed a lawnmower off a bloke, and threw it in the back of the Cub. So Mac and I are in the thing, into the North Branch, start mowing the strip. But we got, I can't remember now, halfway, 3/4 along the first strip, and there's a bloody almighty bang and a cloud of smoke, and the lawnmower had shit itself. So, Jesus Christ, now what are we going to do, Mac? So we threw this thing to one side, and we started stomping up and down, finished that track by trying to flatten all the grass one way, and then did the other one. We were there for hours stomping up and down, and we had no tools with us, didn't have a grubber or anything. So nobody knew where we were. So, well, we've got to get out of here. So anyway, late in the day, we piled into the Supercub and started just take off roll in this long grass. And every now and then you'd feel the thing hesitate, and then away to go again, and hesitate, and away to go again. And finally got to the end of what was the strip, and I just reached down and grabbed a big armful of flap, and this thing levitated off the ground, and it wasn't going to fly. So it's on its way back down again, but I'd crossed a creek at this stage. There's a gravel bank there, and it came down on the gravel bank, boom, and bounced back up in there. And now I'm committed to turn into the gorge. I can't remember whether there's any airspeed or not, probably none. And turned into the thing and down the gorge, never hit anything, didn't touch a thing. But I tell you what, we both sat there shaking for a while. When we got back down to the hut at the Albert Burn, I think we put the aeroplane away, and I don't know whether we got back in it for about 2 days.
But that Piper Cub just kept flying.
Just, yeah, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, if you told someone, if you'd been watching there, you'd think you'd start running with the Band-Aids because the thing was going to crash for sure.
Yeah.
But, just the way that the suspension worked, and it just threw it back up in the air enough to keep it flying.
Yeah, amazing, eh?
Oh, they're a great machine.
Yeah,
great machine.
Yeah. Did you have much interaction with other guys flying Piper Cubs at the time?
Probably only Bill Greenslade primarily, because I was always picking his bones. Where's a good place to go for an easy deer,
Yeah.
And of course, once
Dick Deaker had finished. He was probably
Dick was more based in Tianau, so we sort of didn't get into Tianau area. It was a sort of an unwritten agreement, if you like, that they wouldn't come up into the Shotover catchment if we didn't go down into, Tiana Downs and round that end.
And then all the other guys sort of based at Muscle Point, you probably didn't have a lot to do with, did you?
Only when we used to go over there and stay in the Haast and then fly there for a couple of days and then go back onto our own side.
Yeah, but you had a wee bit to do with Johnny McIntyre, did you? A little
bit, yeah. Well, Johnny McIntyre and Bill had done a lot of ground shooting together, and so any time we were over there, Johnny was shooting for. It'll come to me. Keith Nayland. Keith Nayland. And so we would always stop and say good day to them. And it used to really bug us because we'd come staggering in with a little 300B model with 3.5 deer hanging underneath it, and Ned Naylor had come in the hiller with 12 hanging off it, So, and it's
really good with this airstrip sort of fixed wing project that I'm working on, which we were talking about. A lot of these names are names that we've all read in books about the venison days, but actually having met a lot of these guys now and women, it's great to be able to put faces and personalities to these names, including yourself. Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah. Oh, well, a lot of those guys that really started off doing it really tough and, borrowing enough money to buy a bloody aeroplane and try and service it with shot meat. Most of those guys have had quite successful business careers.
Exactly.
Ned Naylor, is one that stands out, done really well. Very clever businessman.
Yeah. And then, I don't know how long you had the cub for, but you got into choppers after a little bit of time. And it was Dave Saxton that got you into choppers.
It was.
Tell me that story.
I'll just go back one step here. I can remember one day I was staggering down the river with a deer on my back.
You make it sound so, easy of charging.
Yeah, charging was a bit of an overkill.
Yeah.
Staggering down the thing, and I'd shot 3 deer with a spotlight in the night, and this is in the morning. And so I gathered them all up in the morning, and I was tracking them one at a time back to the plane. And anyway, around the corner comes Alan Duncan with his hiller, and he's got a big string of deer hanging under this thing. And this thing went past, and I thought, bloody hell, that's a good idea. All this meat hanging under this helicopter.
Why am I mucking around with this Piper Cub? Why am I
messing around with a bloody Piper Cub and 3 deer at a time? So that's what set me off. So then one day we were in the Icarts Hotel, Bill Greenslade, myself, and Dave Saxton. Well, Dave was here. And Bill said, oh, Dave Saxton? No, I don't go. Dave, how you doing? And what are you doing? I said, oh, well, I'm thinking about, I've got a Supercub and I'm thinking about getting into helicopters. Oh, well, he said, you have to come out the farm. He said, I got the helicopter out the farm. Come out and I'll show you all around it. Oh, good. So we duly agreed to meet and went out to Bill's farm where the Sax kept his helicopter at that stage. And get in. So I get in there and he cranks it up and he shows me effective controls and right, you have a go here and just he had a tire there. You hover around that tire. The tire was here, now it was over there, now it was over there. And finally I managed to keep it within about 10 feet of the tire and then okay, put it down, pick it up, and he had me pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. And so anyway, we knocked off. Yeah, that'll do. We knocked off and went and had a cup of tea and he said, oh, we'll go out and do a bit more if you want to. He said, I'm doing nothing now. I'm waiting for some fuel to come. And so we get back in the machine and we do a bit more. Right, go around the paddock, go around that fence line there. Okay. Oh, don't get too close to that fence. Okay, righto. And he's, okay, just put it down here, down by the tyre. Okay, righto. He said, right, I'm going to get out. All I want you to do is don't you over-rev it. You see that thing there? I don't want you going past 3,000 RPM, all right? Okay, righto. Where are you going? Oh, I'm just going to stand over here. You're kidding. Right, okay. I know, it says helicopter. So anyway, picked it up to the hover and bloody staggered around the tyres from it per minute, and he's going, go. So go and do a circuit. So around the paddock. I mean, I was only 20 feet high.
He must have had a good insurance policy.
Well, he just one of Dave's. He just such a generous bastard. That's a problem. And so we did that, and so with it probably 40 minutes total time in helicopters, I did my first solo.
Wow.
So I then went away to Auckland and bought the 300B model. It had been a guy named Brian Mander and others rebuilt this. They bought it as a company project. They rebuilt it, so it had new engine, new blades, new glass, you name it. It was new. I paid $24,000 for it.
You still had the cub at this point?
Still had the cub at this point, yeah. And so now I had, that's when I ended up talking about that photo with the cub, case car, and the helicopter all parked outside the Aero Club at Tauranga Airport. Not Tauranga Airport.
Boys.
Yeah, I'm talking about Queenstown Airport. So that was my start. But funnily enough, when I got back with this, to me, brand new helicopter, everybody was rolling around the ground laughing. Those bloody Aucklanders ripped you off. You shouldn't have had to pay that much for it. You should have got it for 18 tops. And I didn't know. I thought it was a deal. But yeah, so that you buy that same thing today, you're talking 250,000 today.
Yeah.
You know, and it's still as worn out as it probably would ever be. Yeah.
And you did you told a funny story about shooting some tar with Sax.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, that was weird. Funny, the other day I was just reading through that comment when I was looking through some paperwork. And anyway, how that started, I flew my cub into the mountains there one day, and I'm just trying to think of the side creek we were working up. Anyway, so Dave says to me, I see some tar up there. Jump in, we'll go and shoot them. So
did you do a bit of shooting with them, or this was
not
a
with him?
one-off?
I'd never done shooting out of a helicopter at all.
Right.
But he knew I knew how to handle a gun. So I didn't have a gun there. Somebody had a gun. That was Sax's gun anyway. So piled into this bloody little 300C model, and the way we start climbing up there, and I'm dressed in bloody sneakers. And so we're going up there, and Sax starts shuffling around, and he's looking into this all ice crevices and stuff. And anyway, he said, there they are. He had great eyesight. There they are. Righto. Well, what are we going to do now? And he said, shoot the bastards. I said, well, shit, where are they going to end up? And he said, well, we'll try and work them up into that bluff there. So we got them there. And of course, the whole time he's fighting this thing, it's about 5,500 feet above sea level at this stage. And anyway, so yeah, shoot him. He's going. So no, so bang, 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 knocked him over. He said, oh, bloody good. Okay, right. Now I'm going to drop you off. I said, I'm not getting out of this fucking helicopter, Dave. No way. And he said, well, what's wrong with you? I said, look, I got bloody rubber-soled sneakers on. You want me to go climbing across that ice and recover the ice? I said, I won't do it. Yeah, useless bastard. And this went on and on and on. Finally, he bloody got this pricks, and he peeled off the hill here, and he pointed this 300 at the valley floor. And seriously, you never think a bloody 300 would stand that sort of airspeed. It was just off the clock. I was just waiting for the bubble to just disappear.
Yeah.
Anyway, get out, you useless bastard. And tell that kid to come over here. And I said, Dave wants to see you. The kid goes over. He's a forestry trainee or something. Get in the helicopter. You know how to use a gun? Get in the helicopter. So away they went. And then the kid got out and gathered them all up because he had bloody trichunis on his boots. So he was ready for the ice and I wasn't. So anyway, he got them back. Once it was all settled down and the deer were all on the truck, he was back to his normal self.
He just went into a mad Dave mode, did he?
Oh shit, yeah. But he could. Well, he would. Didn't see him go off that often, but when he went off, it was a bloody award-winning demonstration. It really was. But 10 minutes later, he'd be back bloody playing jokes on you.
Yeah.
So he's a great character. I really miss him.
So you spent a lot of time with Dave over the years.
Yeah,
we became a good friend right up until when he died. Was that right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, basically, what happened is Dave. When I first met him, Dave was living at a house in Dalefield, which is on the flat land between Arthur's Point, or between Queenstown and Arrowtown. And we were living at Arthur's Point there. We had a small 21-acre block there, and Dave was in the throes of a matrimonial with his first wife. Anyway, Dave, one day he arrives round at our place with the 2 kids, Morgan and Lisa, and says to Kay, "Look, we're going for a shot. Would you mind looking after the kids?" So Kay said, "Oh, yeah, that's okay." All right. So these kids are like this big, you know. And so he buggers off in the helicopter and comes back late in the day, covered in blood and shit, of course. And so Kay had bathed the kids and got their dinner, and so Sax picked them up, threw them in the back of the ute, and disappeared. Well, that became a pretty regular exercise. Kay, would you mind looking after the kids for a couple of days? So Kay raised his kids, 2 kids for him for quite a big part of that time. But yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it just the way he was, and but those kids, you know, grew up. Unfortunately, Morgan's gone. Lisa's still around, but and then Darren, he had another son with his second wife, and unfortunately, he got killed in a car accident at Haast. He'd been in the pub, came out of the pub, car parked there, and swung around a corner and rolled the thing over, and didn't have a seatbelt on, so he got bloody crushed under it.
Wow.
But yeah, so poor old Dave. But we sort of worked with him through all these trials and tribulations. He kept, you know, getting in trouble with this conservationist and this person and
the greenstone issues.
The greenstone, of course, was the biggie. Dave had a permit, a mining license to recover greenstone. And he was doing quite well out of it. You know, he spent a lot of time cutting up rocks and stuff. But the change of government saw Helen Clark come in, and she decided, in her wisdom, and I'm sure some help from the Maori population, that they wanted to control the greenstone. And so she put an act of parliament through that made the greenstone belonging to the Maoris, and you weren't allowed to do anything too much with it at all. You could, if you could carry a piece of greenstone that you found in a river, you could keep that, but that was about the limit of it. So anyway, they got into a big bun fight, and he claimed because he had a mining license, they couldn't stop him, and they really set to and made an example of him and Morgan. They put remote cameras all around his farm, so they could tell when he came and when he went and what he had hanging under the machine. I think I showed you a photo of him cutting up some greenstone the other day. So he was just doing what he figured he was entitled to do. And the next thing, they grabbed him, they put him through the courts, and Dave and Morgan both went to jail. It was a real stitch up, unfortunately, but Dave became a different person after that happened, and there was a time there that the flying doctor who used to do his maintenance was concerned about his sanity, and he was having trouble convincing Dave that he should take a rest from flying for a while.
Did you have much to do with him when he was in jail and during that time?
Only by letter.
Yeah.
I never went and visited him because he didn't want anybody to visit him. Just like he, you know, I've got a collection of photos of Dave, but normally if somebody said, "Dave, can I take your picture?" he'd know, bugger off, stop taking. He was sort of camera shy, if that's the way. But anyway, it was what it is, and so it was terrible that they ended up in jail, which sort of buggered them both because he'd never done anybody any harm. He was a generous man to the fault. They were calling him out in the middle of the night to go and rescue some nutcase that tried to climb up the side of a mountain, and he just did all that stuff, and he never got paid for most of it.
Yeah.
Very, as I say, very generous. But unfortunately, he met a new partner, and they set up camp up in the Marlborough Sounds. And Dave was developing this block on quite a steep face, and he was cutting panga logs on the back of a quad bike. And they're bloody heavy, as you probably know. And anyway, just cutting a corner, he hit the front right wheel on a rock sticking out of the bank, and it flipped the thing over and landed on him and crushed very badly his leg. And they whipped him off to Wellington Hospital, and the doctors wanted to cut it off because there was a lot of missing circulation and stuff. Dave wouldn't let him cut it off, so he fought it for probably 2 years total against infection, and eventually the infection just got right through his system, and he just stopped working, and so he died. And this is about 3-4 years ago, I think we discussed yesterday. So we really miss him because he was one of life's characters.
Yeah, one of those larger than life guys by the sound of it.
And like I say, he never hurt anybody. He was big and strong enough. He could have won every bloody fight that was ever in a pub, hands down. But I never saw him scrapping with anybody. Used to be a fair bit of that went on, but it was just jealousies mostly. Yeah.
So you traded the Cub and bought the 300,
correct?
The B model.
Yep.
And I think you bought that off Ron Connell. Was that
not the first
one?
No, not that one.
No,
it was another one.
Just park that thought.
Yep.
I think you said was it the B model you ferried from Auckland to Queenstown and did the last half of the flight by yourself.
Correct.
And got stuck in cloud?
Well, it was the first part we got stuck. A guy named Mike Foster, who's a pretty well-known flight instructor, aeroplane person, based in Ardmore, or was in those days. He was the only guy around that was a licensed helicopter instructor. So I got hold of him and said, look, I've bought this thing. I've been training with Larry Larrivee. I'm up to this stage of my training, renting a machine through Larry. And I've bought this helicopter from these guys in Ardmore, and I need someone to fly with me to get me across the Cook Strait. And then I can probably fake it from there because I know the country a bit from there on. And that's okay. So anyway, we get in this bloody thing, and this is the B model, and we take off. And we got down around Tamaranui somewhere and flew into a cloud. And I'm thinking, well, he knows what he's doing. So I'm flying it, and he's going, turn over here, turn over there. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, poof, we're full IFR. We're in cloud is what I should say. And I've got it, he said. Right, you have it. And this thing came hurtling out of this thing, sort of half on its side. And we ended up popped out, luckily, about 300 foot above a ground. And we were in a playground of a school, like a football field on a school. And these kids all standing around looking at this helicopter coming out of the clouds.
Out of control.
So anyway, we bloody landed. Christ, don't do that again. Jeez, I don't know how we let that happen. Anyway, we settled down a bit, cranked it up, and carried on. Well, we hadn't gone half an hour, and we did exactly the same thing again.
Wow.
and luckily, he had the smarts. I mean, we were solid cloud. We just flew into a bank. Don't know how it happened. Anyway, he turned the thing to the east. He told me later he spun the thing around because we had been heading south. So he turned it around to the east, and he started climbing, and then we popped out on top of this overcast or fog or whatever it was. And he said that he turned to east because he said that was the only way I could rely on the bloody compass. I'm not bloody processing or swinging around. And I would never even thought of that. I was too busy trying to save my ass. But so anyway, long story short, he got me across to, I think we got to Nelson, I think. I can't quite remember. Nelson or Motueka. And he bailed. It must have been Nelson because he flew back home. And I never saw him for years and years after that. And one day I walked into a social gathering. Someone said, oh, do you know Foster here? Oh, yeah, I did a bit of flying with him one time. He goes, yeah, you bastard, you nearly killed me. So hang on, you were the pilot in command. I was a trainee student. What are you talking about? So we had a good yarn about that. But yeah, we were bloody lucky.
Yeah.
Anyway, I then got it cranked up again wherever we were, filled up with gas, and took off down the coast. And I flew down the west coast probably to the Holyfoot, and then back into Queenstown from there.
So you finish your training with Larry Larrabee, and then you promised Kay that you wouldn't get into Venison Recovery.
Yeah, well, this is at the time when
Yeah, the excuses are rolling already.
Yeah, well, this is at the time when everybody's, buying helicopters, crashing helicopters, making fortunes out of bloody not live deer, dead deer. And, well, she said, you sure you're not going to get into that, are you? No. Oh, and that's far too dangerous. Let's carry on. And this went on and on and on. And okay, well, that's good. So I'm going to get my license. And so I kept going back to Larry, and finally he got me bloody checked out and rated. And we're sitting there one day, and Bill Greenslade arrives up the driveway, and, what are you doing? Beautiful day. Just sitting around shooting a bit. You want a coffee? Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. Well, why don't we go for a bit of a look up the shot over? Okay. So Bill said, no, we'll just go and have a bit of a look up there. And so he gets a handful of baler twine out of the bloody store shed, sticks it in his pocket, undoes his stuffing it down here. What are you doing with that? Oh, I just thought a bit of baling twine. And the next thing, he goes over his truck and he grabs it. I've got the helicopter warmed up. He goes over and comes out with the rifle. I said, what are you doing with that? Oh, I just thought being in case we see a deer somewhere. I said, I can't do that. I'll get in the shit, man. Anyway, so where we go. So we actually we flew along the face of the Coronet Peak and dropped into the deep creek in behind Coronet Peak there. And just come around the corner, here's 4 bloody deer running up the hill. Oh, we'll get these ones. Oh, shit, no, Bill. Anyway, this carried on. So finally, he got me into a position where he could hit him, and he was a hell of a good shot, Bill, too. He won a lot of awards at skeet shooting. But anyway, bang, 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 these 4 deer ass overhead. Shit, that was easy. Okay. So he said, right, now what you do now is you go around here, and you come in there, and you just drop me off alongside that one there, and then you go away, and then I'll clean them up and pull them together and hook them all on. I said, no, shit, I can't lift 4 deer, shit, no, because I've been used to lifting a bloody car tire with some concrete in it, and that was my hook rating, And anyway, so he you'll be right. I said, no, I can't, Bill, wouldn't be able to lift. You will. He said, look, Sax lifts bloody twice as many as these, and this was something that haunted me in the first years of my life. Sax would do this, or Sax wouldn't do that, and Bill was using his as a yardstick as well. So anyway, finally I talked him into hooking 2 on, and I flew them back to home, which was only 5 minutes away, and then go back and got Bill and the other one and flew back. And then we whizzed them round to Jones's bloody meat place, and he gave us a check for $400 or $300 or something.
Shit, this is the easiest money I've ever earned.
Look at this, Kay, look at this. And anyway, so it was the beginning of it all.
What were you planning on doing with the machine if you weren't going to do venison recovery?
I was always going to do venison. Probably.
Yeah.
I just thought it'd take a bit of organising, that was all.
You just had to play your cards, and Bill played them for you.
Yeah, well, because if Kay started grizzling about saying, that you guys you're not supposed to be shooting any deer, Bill would say, no, you'll be right, Kay. No, you'll be right. You'll be right. He'll be okay. Don't worry about him. And so anyway, she got used to it, I think, in the end. But she still tells the stories and how she's sitting there waiting for us to come home, and we're late, and no one knows where we are. And
pretty tough on the wives.
Oh yeah.
So then you had recently bought a farm at Arthur's Point, and then you fenced it off for live capture.
Yep.
And started darting deer.
Yeah, we started with darts. Yeah. Brian Bassett Smith, he's a guy who had a game park up in Timaru, Hadlow Game Park, and he was mates with the guy who invented the Pax Arms pistols and rifles to fire the darts. So he had done a bit of work with Tim Wallace, and so we found him somehow. Someone put us on to him, and we said, look, we want to start catching a deer alive using the drugs. Can you give us a bit of a heads up? So we worked out a financial deal that he would help us supply the stuff and show us how to use it and how to look after the deer. So we started just started using the dart. We used a dart pistol. We did have a rifle, but we used a pistol most of the time because we could get close enough. And Bill was always pretty handy with the pistol as well. And so that's how we really started. And luckily, we got on to Otamatata Station, which is quite a big tussock station, and there were deer running everywhere on there.
So
And
you got into the net capture, the netting?
No, we stayed with darts pretty much. We got into the net guns really toward the end of my reign. And the biggest problem was that the early guns, the ones that we ended up with, the bloody used to kick so hard that you break the guy's hand, the guy trying to hang on to it. And a lot of the guys actually ended up parking them against the door jamb. And they'd actually hit hard enough that they'd bend the frame on the helicopter. So I only had net guns toward the end of my live deer thing. But if we'd had them in the early days, we would have caught a lot more deer.
Yeah.
Because we'd dart a hind and it's yearling fawn or yearling, and we'd just work with those two. Otherwise, if you fired half a dozen darts in different deer, they could all be all over the place. You'd never find them all.
Yeah. So things started getting a bit serious, and you sold the B model and leased a 500.
That's right. Yeah. Well, no. What happened is, you're right. You did right. The B model needed some work done to it, and so through the agents Delhoff and King, they found a buyer from the guy that owned Mount Lytton Station. He wanted a 300 because he was learning to fly, and they figured, well, it would do him until he got his license, and then he'd have to spend some time on it. So we decided to bail out of that, and that's when we went and bought the C model, the first C model we had, and just trying to think where that first one came from. I think from Delhoff's and Dunedin. And then you referred earlier on to Ron Connell.
I think when I met you up at your place a couple of months ago, you said that when you bought the machine off Ron Connell, he was in his big office and put his feet up on the table in his cowboy hat and another larger-than-life character.
And a drawer full of handguns.
A drawer full of handguns.
Yeah. That was exactly how we saw him. And he had this helicopter for sale, so we flew up there. Brian Bassett and I flew up there and visited with Ron, and he had this big mahogany or oak desk, and with all carved, and had a big American eagle on the front of it or something. He was very flamboyant with a cowboy hat and cowboy shirt and all the gear.
Yeah, and after that trip I had to see you, I went to see Ron, and he's got a few medical issues now. He's not well, but he turned up with his partner, and he had cowboy cap on, larger than life. Even with his medical issues, you can tell. He's
just hanging in there.
He's a pretty larger than life character, and we had a great 3 hours just going over his life and all the adventures he's had in the States, and certainly sees himself as a cowboy. Guns and handguns, and that lifestyle is what he really loves.
Well, he must have just about handled every private helicopter sale in the North Island at one stage. If you needed a helicopter, go and see Ron Connell, or you want to lease one, go and see Ron Connell.
Yeah, well, he was based in Texas for years and just had hangars full of machines coming and going.
Yeah, I know.
Lots of amazing stories. It was great to...
Yeah, well, he had this flash office at Taupo Airport. I'm sure that's where we went and saw him. But no, he's a character, right?
So then with the C model, you started catching wapiti from live in the Fiordland National Park.
Yeah, we weren't supposed to be down there. What we used to do was on Christmas Day, Saxton, his machine, and I and my machine with Bill, we'd load up with fuel and fly from Queenstown to Kaimai Downs, stop and top the fuel up, take 2 jerry cans with us, and fly into Fiordland and mainly to the head of George Sound. And we'd fly around there and looking for Wapiti cows with a fawn at foot, or the female fawn at
What
foot.
were you looking? What was the purpose of this?
We wanted to get some of the New Zealand Wapiti stock into our red deer, because we had seen some New Zealand Wapiti that came out of the park that had produced weaners at 80 kilograms when a red deer weaner was at 40 kilograms.
Right. To increase the size of the
I always figured it was a meat industry.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to produce more meat, we had to have a bigger breed. Notwithstanding the fact that their food intake is twice that of a red deer as well. But because they hybridized, obviously you had this strain of deer in Fiordland that ranged from pure red to pure New Zealand Wapiti. So it was a matter of just flying around and finding a cow. You had no idea who was the father of the fawn. You couldn't get him and her together to look at the kid. So we would just see something that showed good Wapiti tendencies. So we would just grab them. We weren't tranquilizing, we were just jumping on them. And, well, Bill was. I was sitting there watching. And jump them, tie their legs and put them we had a chaff sacks that we had on the machine, put them in there. So if they were thrashing around, they weren't kicking the bloody master switch off or something.
Wow.
So we ended up with 2 of them in the front of the 300. And
plus 2 of you.
2 of us. Jerry can or 2 on the back.
And you weren't meant to be doing this.
No, we were lost. We weren't sure where the boundary was.
You just found them in the...
Well, we just figured that on Christmas Day, if the park's rangers would be all home entertaining their families. And in fact, one year we went, I can't remember if it was the first or the second year. We did this for 2 years running. We come around the corner at the head of George Sound, and here's a helicopter coming straight for us. We both stopped. He turned around, I turned around, and we... So he was in there poaching too, and I know who it was too.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive.
Well, yeah, you probably remember it.
He was having a bit of a poke around too.
Everyone's out being a bit naughty.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But, the deer belong to everybody.
Yeah.
And they're a noxious animal anyway. So that was our argument anyway.
Yeah.
But, I wouldn't have liked to got caught.
Another venture that you got into briefly was goat farming.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't so much farming as catching goats.
Right.
We were catching goats. The Shoto was full of goats. There was a big surge came out of Fiji for the Indians up there all looking for goat meat. And they were paying $50 a goat. No, hang on. The $50 goats were a female goat was $50, and the billy goats were just being sold on body weight. So we were going out sometime catching 40 or 50 goats in a day. So and we normally do that in the winter when there weren't too many deer about poking around anyway. So it was another way of keeping the money coming in.
Yeah, but that ended up you had quite a bad accident.
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
doing that.
Yeah, probably the only real bad accident I've ever had in an airplane, or a helicopter. Yeah, we were catching goats in behind Coronet Peak Station in a big creek there called Deep Creek, and unbeknown to us, there was a guy named Joe Scheib who was an early gold miner. He'd strung a 12 gauge wire across between a high point. 2 high points either side of a creek, and he was using it rather than have to carry his mining pipes down into the creek and then back up the other side. He would sit them on this thing which had a flying fox effect, and the pipes would slide down to the other end, and he'd just load 2 or 3 and then go and clear that other end and keep sending some more. But nobody in the flying fraternity around there had ever come across those wires or knew they were there, because there weren't any deer in that country, so we were working this mob of deer up a face, and with goats, if you hover over them with the helicopter, they'll run for a while, and then if you get them sort of to bail up, they'll all just huddle together and just stay in a mob, and the shooters could jump out and grab an armful of them and sex them, and because we were mainly catching there were two markets, as I said, one for meat, one for nannies for crossing with the Angora. Was a big time there for a while. So if we were catching nannies, he'd just sex them on the run, and tie them up, hook them on a strop. So you'd end up carrying, 8 or 10 goats hanging on a strop, and just fly them down to the truck. We had the truck just down below Deep Creek there, so we were making quite good money at that. Anyway, I was hovering up this creek late in the day, like evening time, and sun in my eyes, looking into the west, and didn't see the wire. The first thing I heard was that first thing I noticed was the helicopter sort of reared up, like someone had just stopped the thing in midair, and it reared up like this. And what it had done, it is actually the wire had gone in just under the blade, under one of the main rotor blades, right around the mast. And I'd strained it up, and it went tight until it broke. And when it broke, it came out of where it was buried in the ground. At each side, it had gone rusty. So when I strained it up, both ends must have let go at the same time, because we had about 300 meters of this high 12 gauge high tensile wire arriving at the helicopter. The tail rotor picked it up like a fishing reel, wound it up until it seized, and then the tail boom came off. And all I can remember is seeing Coronet Peak going past about that rate. And
who were you with?
Brian McCarthy was with me. He features in some of my stories, because every time I nearly killed myself, Brian was with me. So we considered it was probably a good idea if we stopped flying together. And anyway, I remember Larry telling me when we were training that if you get in the shit or the engine stops and you're in the mountains, don't head for the creek, because if you try and put it on a ridge and you bugger it up, you're going to fall down into the creek anyway. Mm. So I had no control at this point, but I remember having that thought go through my mind: in the creek. And as it turned out, we hit the thing about 20 feet above the creek. The helicopter flipped upside down and planted itself in the creek. Creek only had that much water in it. So, there was a lot of noise and crash bang, and then not much noise. And I'm sort of sitting in there thinking, shit, what was that? What happened there? Mac's going, are you all right? And I'm going, yeah, I'm right, you're all right. So anyway, I was all right until I undid my seatbelt. And then I pinged out, because I was upside down, I went out through the bubble, what was left of the bubble, and I cut my face up and my head a bit. But that was my only injury. And Mac,
which is amazing, because that helicopter was rolled up in a ball.
and Mac had a sore back, because he'd actually come down, his skid had hit the ground first, and with enough force to flip the whole thing over, and he got a compression, not a fracture, but a compression of the spinal cord. So he had to crook back for a wee while. But yeah, so anyway, we're both agreeing we're okay. And then you could hear this thing, the engine cooling down. First of all, it was bloody roaring its head off, and I reached out to try and turn the mags off, and there's no panel there because I'm upside down, and now the panel's up there. Yeah. Anyway, finally it stopped, and we both bailed out of there, and you could hear this thing cooling down, tick, 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 tick. So at that point, I let my seatbelt go, and I would have been fine if I hadn't done that. And so we scrambled away from it and climbed up the hill and sort of shook our heads and thought, shit, that's a bastard. So we started walking, funnily enough, we walked down to the guy who put the wire up, his house, he lives on the edge of the shot over there. And
bet he wasn't the most popular guy.
He said, hey, Jesus, what happened to you guys? So up in the helicopter, blah, blah. Some asshole put a bloody wire up across a creek up there, and I just found it. Oh, shit, he said, I put that up there 20 years ago. And he said, I only used it for a week, and then I never used it again. I said, well, Richard, you won't have to take it down now because it's down. And so anyway, he took us out to the bloody hospital and got stitched up, and we're all good. Mm. So, yeah, that was when I went looking for the machine at Connell's.
Right.
To replace that one, yeah.
Getting away from aviation, there was another
sounds like a fun period where you were the jet boat driver in the race for the Yankee Zephyr movie.
Yeah, they were
Or you were a jet boat driver.
one of the jet boat drivers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well,
And I had never seen that movie, but it's actually on YouTube.
oh, is
So I watched it after you told me
Oh,
that.
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
hard case movie.
Oh, they're pretty piss poor acting and stuff. But we thought we were doing a hell of a job.
Was it good at the time, or?
Oh, yeah,
or,
it was great. Yeah, exciting. Yeah, it was exciting work.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of cringe at it a wee bit these days, but
Yeah, I mean that's one. But today's, you know, the actors. They were skilled actors, obviously, but a lot of us, ring-ins that had a few lines to say, we didn't really do a very good job of it, but we thought we were doing okay.
But it must have been a big thing for the Queenstown.
Oh,
the
big
area.
for the town, yeah. Because it was that there was that movie, and the other one was called My Strange Uncle, and it was filmed in IMAX, and it was filmed all over the Wapiti Basin, and I was playing the part of a husband, wife, and two small children who, every time they went somewhere, this bloody helicopter or this jet boat or something disturbed them. Like they nearly got run over on the beach by an out of control jet boat, and it ploughed through their picnic lunch. And then a helicopter came and blew all the sand over everybody, and they were. I was the husband who was dogged by bad things happening to the whole family all the way through this movie.
So in Race for the Yankee Zephyr, how did you get nominated to be the jet boat driver?
Well, what happened is Colin Robinson and Ross Marrett, the guy who bought my jet boat off me, they bought some later model Jet 73s. And they had 4 of them, and so they used those for the movie. So I just got seconded as a driver of one of the boats. So I had a big bloody orange wig on, and there was never a close-up shot of my face, but from behind you could see this big guy, because I was supposed to be the heroine, not heroine. What do you call
heroine?
Heroine of the story, and she was being chased by the bad guys all the time. But yeah, it was good.
Get giddy! They're going for the boat! Hey, mate, me, you idiot! Into the other boat! Come on! That's it, keep it up! After them! Pick it up, get into the water, get that cover off! They're getting away! Hurry up! Get them out in the water, come on!
Down!
Who's gonna drive this thing? Jet boat champion, Auckland, class of 76. She's a nutcase. What? Her? I don't like this.
Gotta turn around! Hang on! Come down!
And what was it like working with Hollywood?
Oh, it was all right. A huge waste of money. I mean, they would have 50 or 60 people poised, ready to go to Glenorchy to film a shot, and been there. The catering trucks there. Everybody's eating bloody bacon sandwiches and living high life. And all of a sudden, the producer or the director will say, "No, we've cancelled that. It's too much cloud up at Glenorchy. We're going down to Kingston." So everyone pack up, go down to Kingston. No, the wind's blowing the wrong way here. We're back to Queenstown. And this went on day after day after day. We were getting paid, but just a huge waste. It's the only thing I'd talk me about movies is just a total waste of money. And when you see at the end of a movie where you get all the credits rolling, you see all these assistant to the assistant of the assistant. Yeah. You think,
I noticed your name wasn't on the credits.
No, that's probably not.
But I did see Rex Davies. I think he flew the helicopter, did he?
He would have been in the helicopter. But that was an exciting time,
Yeah. Another wild venture, you decided to get into cray fishing in Milford, was it?
No, well,
Or
we came across a guy named Ray Finn. You've heard that name. He now lives up in Te Anau. But he was a guy that spent a lot of time in the machine with Saxes, several machines of Saxes. Anyway, Ray Finn was cray fishing down in Breaksea Sound, and he had a barge down there, like just a barge, and they lived on the barge and they fished with a little dory. Him and another guy named Chris, I can't think of his last name. And so we're talking to Ray in the pub one day. He said, "Oh, you should come down fishing." "Oh, yeah, whereabouts are you?" "Oh, we're in Breaksea Sound." And so, long story short, all you had to do in those days was go down to Invercargill to the fisheries bloody department, or whatever they were called, and you made an application for a license, cray fishing license, and you paid your $25 or whatever, and you walked out with a cray fishing license. It was before quota or anything. So this document allowed you to catch crayfish on the west coast or South Island, New Zealand. So, we had that. So we went and got 100 pots made by a pot maker in Bluff, and they were taken round by one of the oyster boats and dropped off in the tide, with boys marking them. And at low tide, they were standing dry. So when we got down there, we took the drifter, which is the boat we got from Te Anau, and the dory. We motored those down from Milford. And then we reassembled all our pots, or got our pots all made up with the right length of rope and the buoys on them and the name on the buoys and all the rest of it. And we started cray fishing, and we did a whole season there. So that was like a September through February season, I think it was. And
but there was a bit of a story about some of the old timers tricked these rookies with a spot for the.
Yeah. Well, we were green, man. We were green. I tell you what. All we knew is that you only catch crayfish if you put a pot in the water. You'd catch a crayfish. Anyway, we started putting these pots out in places that we thought were ideal crayfish spots, and weren't many pots around us at all. So we didn't like to sort of put our pots next to someone else's, because I thought they'd cut the bloody things off. So anyway, we set the pots and went out next day to pick them up. And round a particular area there, we're pulling the pots up, and the bloody pots are full of crayfish, and there's crayfish standing on the outside of the pot. Holy shit, this is going to be easy, man. We're in the money here. So we emptied the pot out, rebait it, threw it back in the same place, went down to the next one, pulled it out, full of crayfish. Shit, this is going to be so easy to make money. Anyway, we go back that night. We tell them, geez, we did well today. We caught, I can't remember how many, let's say 80 crayfish for the day out of 2 pots or something. And where'd you get those? Oh, we were around by that big seal rock, where that seal colony is. Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, we never fished there. Oh, that's good. And then, long story short, somebody started bloody giggling or something, and then I thought, what's going on here? And they'd come in with all of their short fish, kept their short fish, put them all in our pots, and not said anything, obviously. We thought we'd actually hit a gold mine of crayfish. And but those guys down there, they're all hard men, but geez, they're funny bastards too. They're always playing tricks on each other.
Yeah,
they're really good. We enjoyed it down there, but the reason we only lasted one season, it was okay financially, although obviously being the first season, we didn't make any money for that first year because we were setting up costs. But Kay tried about 3 times to fly in. The idea was, because we had the drifter we had, I think 6 bunks on the drifter, so it was set up with a proper kitchen and everything. So the idea, Kay was going to fly in on the float plane, spend a few days with us, and when she'd had enough, she'd fly back out again, and we'd just keep fishing. And every time she tried, she'd drive down to Te Anau from Queenstown, and then drive to Milford, and get on a plane. That's right, get on the float plane at Milford, and then down to the Sounds, or tried to get to the Sounds, and they got turned back about 3 times in a row. She got turned back, so we got a radio message. Kay couldn't get through. Weather was too bad. Something. So in the end, she started getting the pricker with living on her own again. So yeah, so we made a decision to give it away.
And when you started that, you lifted that, what was the boat's name?
The drifter. Oh,
Takaro out of Tiana and
Correct.
trucked it through to Milford.
Oh yeah, shit, yeah. Yeah, well, we did, and a guy had a loading transport, and he said, "Oh, I can take it through the tunnel." I said, "Oh, really?" You know, we didn't know quite how we were going to get it to the ocean, and we thought we might have to take it down, you know, through Bluff and launch it down there. But anyway, no, we were right. I measured it all up, blah 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 blah. But when we were modifying the thing, it had two big stanchions on the stern of it, and they were like 2-inch galvanized water pipe with a round top, and they were for hanging the dinghy davit. They were dinghy davits, and obviously when you wanted the dinghy out of the water, you could just winch it up onto these davits. Well, anyway, we got 3/4 of the way through the bloody Milford Tunnel, and these davits ended up jammed up against a roof of the tunnel. So now we've got a line of bloody tour buses and cars and shit behind us, and more coming up the hill from Milford. Not so many. It was early in the day, so we're trying to beat the crowd, and we're trying to bloody jostle this and pull it, and we let all the hydraulics down on what hydraulics there were on the truck. We let most of the air out of the tyres on the trailer, and we still couldn't get through there. So we set to with a hacksaw, and you know how hard it is to hacksaw 2-inch water pipe. So how long it took. And luckily we had a bloody big pack of brand new blades, and we broke one every sort of quarter of an hour we broke. Finally we had enough that we could actually bend them down, and we got away. And
No stress.
No stress. Bloody, cars backed up as far as you could see back towards Tiana.
The start of the big cray fishing venture.
Yeah, the cray fishing venture, yeah. But she's a lovely old boat. Had a 6-cylinder Ford in it. Just ran on the smell of an oily rag, and yeah, good boat.
Was there a bit of a story with loaning that to a mate?
Yeah, I did. I made the mistake of, not a mistake. He was a reasonable mate and knew a bit about boats. So he said, you know, we want to go and get a feed. So yeah, okay. He actually had been on the boat with me, so I knew he was okay. So he took the boat out, and he was saying that it had been a bit of an easterly blowing for a while, so the surf or the waves are pretty flat out past the Milford Heads, around the corner from Anita Bay, and he was in trying to pick up a pot he'd put down, and I think what happened is that the boat's gone up on a bit of a swell, and it's come down on a pinnacle or something and punched a hole in it. So anyway, he's carried on. He recovered the pot or whatever and started motoring back toward the sound, towards Anita Bay. And all of a sudden the engine stopped. So he went down to see why it had stopped, and there was bloody 2 foot of water in the bilge. And so she was obviously taken on water. And luck, as luck would have it, or lucky for him, is that a bloody fishing boat was on its way, came on its way back to Milford, and saw him there, and saw him, you know, floundering around in the water. And they went in and picked him up, and they towed him. And they towed him, just got into the mouth of the sound, and the bloody thing sunk. It started doing this, being towed, and it was picking up water all the time. And finally they said it speared down, and they just cut the rope and let it go. So
what did he tell you when he rang you up to say
well,
how
he was
the
full
trip
of
went?
apologies, of course, but it was just one of those things. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't have happened, but just, you know,
Wow.
something about lending your gear.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
The next venture, so this is August 1983, you purchased 50% of a large property in the Kaimai Ranges.
Correct, yep.
And called it Kaimai Downs, and turned it into a deer breeding venture.
Yeah, we did, yeah. Well, what happened is Kay and I had gone on a bit of a road trip up into the North Island, and a mate of hers who she used to play squash with when she lived in Palmerston North, Snow Temperton, he was working up there, and he was working for the Kiwi Fruit Marketing Board. So we ran into him, and we were quite interested in this kiwi fruit, having just come from frozen water pipes and everything in Queenstown in the middle of winter. and everyone's getting around in shorts and a t-shirt up in Mount Maunganui or around the coast. So we thought, that kiwi fruit sounds like a bit of a go, and so we got Snow to start talking or telling us and showing us around what's involved in growing kiwi fruit, and can you buy an existing orchard. But luckily we ran into another businessman in Tauranga, Des Ferro, or Ferro family, who we've since had a lot to do with, and he had been offered a share in this property up in the Kaimais. So Snow took us around on a Friday night. They always had a bit of a beer session in Des's office on a Friday, and we met this fellow, and he said, I'll show you a property that I've been looking at. And he took us up and showed us this property, 370 acres roughly, and it was a rundown sheep and cattle property with a nice stone house, like brick house on it, and but the facilities were virtually non-existent. Woolshed was falling down, So, long story short, we did a handshake deal on that and came back to Queenstown, put our 21 acres with a brand new house on it for sale at Arthur's Point. Sold that for $300,000. Thought we were pretty well paid on the day, happy on the day. Since then, that bottom, it's on 2 terraces, that 21 acres. The bottom half of the thing now has 42 houses on there. And a bare section, if there was one available, would be $600,000 for one section. We sold the whole shooting box for $300,000 and thought we got well paid. So anyway, we that got our share into this farm, and it was a 50-50 split on the way. And so we ripped all the old fencing down and all the old troughs and put new water system and all new deer fencing. We put about 14 kilometres of deer fencing up. And
you bought Wapiti bulls from down south up north?
Yeah, well, a guy named John Barber imported 2 young bulls. They were 2-year-old. He bought them. They were from a herd of Roosevelt elk up in Canada. And anyway, he was auctioning a pair of them. So we went down and had a look at them both and made a decision which one we wanted to buy. So we showed up at the auction, and we managed to be the highest bidder for that the elk of our choice. And it turned out that he had a really good temperament, and the only thing was he wasn't as fertile as we had hoped he was. So we would run him with about 20 cows each rut, and we'd be lucky if we got 7, 8 bloody calves out of him. And of course,
this was the one you said you paid $80,000 for.
We did, yeah. That
was a lot of money.
That was a rush of blood too. I tell you, we our partner, Mr. Ferro, he said, "You going to have a shot at this or what?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I think. What do you think you have to pay for it?" And I said, "Probably 50." And he said, "Oh well, if you feel comfortable enough, that's fine." So he's standing alongside me and it got to 50 and 55 or whatever, and there's 60, 75. I said, shit. And I said, look, one more shot and that's it, all right? And he said, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, $80,000 sold. So, shit. So then we had to get the bloody thing from the South Island. So, there was another drama over shipping deer by truck from Canterbury up to the farm. But he turned out to be, he sold us. We sold a lot of deer because of the fact his temperament was good. He was a good example of the breed, but he was pure elk. He had no Wapiti, no New Zealand Wapiti in him at all, obviously. But that was a big chunk of money those days.
Yeah. The last 23 years, your venture has been aircraft restoration. So this one's lasted some time.
Yeah, that was the long living one.
And I mean, you've certainly developed a reputation and a name for yourself doing that. I just had a bit of a search on the internet, and some of the terms that come up are amazing craftsmanship, Frank Wright, the serial Beaver Builder, the legendary Wright colour scheme, which is very well known.
It is, yeah.
So, firstly, where did the colour scheme come from?
Well, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but everybody said, "Oh, you've copied Air New Zealand colours," because they had the similar, the dark blue with the teal over the white. And I know, and I liked it as a combination. And you will have seen some of the photos that we always followed the Cessna scheme or the Beaver scheme, because a lot of people get hold of an aeroplane, they paint strip it and say, now what, we're going to paint it. Oh, my sister, she's a graphic artist, so she'll design something.
Yeah.
So they design with swirls and look, it looks like shit basically. And we always felt that at least Cessna and de Havilland would have paid somebody a lot of money to design a paint scheme for that aircraft. So we've always sort of stuck pretty similar to that. But the colours have slightly, the blue is not quite as dark, and the teal is a lot brighter now than the first ones we did.
Right. They look great. They look amazing.
Yeah, they're very fresh.
And they've stood the test of time.
Yeah, they certainly have.
So the plan generally is to purchase an aircraft yourself and rebuild it and then sell it.
That's
not
right.
to do customer work.
We don't do any. We never done custom work other than rats and mice, or can you fix this dent in the side of it or whatever.
And you've done, I think, over 30 different aircraft.
Yeah, we had a bit of a count up the other day, 37 total.
Amazing.
And now some of those we did bugger all to, just a bit of cosmetic stuff. Probably gave them a wash and washed the cow shit off them.
Yeah.
But others have been major rebuilds. The longest one we did was the last 206, which took 3 years, the Delta Whiskey Mike. And
there was an interesting story in your book about, might have been your second 180 that you ferried, or you bought from Australia, and you flew it with Jim Hazelton to Sydney in the dark.
Yeah. Well, I heard of this aeroplane being for sale in Broken Hill in Australia. And so Jim Hazelton is a very well-known Australian gentleman who did a lot of ferrying for various companies, ferrying aeroplanes around the world. And you need an aeroplane shifted from one country to another. Jim could do it. So anyway, I called Jim and told him I was going to look at this aeroplane and would he mind coming to Broken Hill. So we picked him up in Sydney, flew to Broken Hill, and we had half an hour to make up our mind whether or not we were going to buy it or walk away, because the plane that we flew in there, which I can't remember, was a Q300 or something like that, and it was going regardless. So we had to be on it or we'd have to stay the night. So we had a quick look around, stuck my head down the back end of it, started it up, did everything. It seemed fine. I said, yeah, I think we'll go ahead with it, Jim. And he said, oh, that's good. Well, we need some fuel. I said, what do we need some fuel for? Oh, we're going to take it to Sydney now. And so we'd obviously paid for it. So we filled it up, and now it's about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So we stooge off across the bloody Australia in this thing, and now it's dark, and we're looking for a place called Parks, and no GPS, no nothing. Just Jim's trying to remember where Parks is. It's in that direction somewhere. So I finally see some lights, and that's my dear. Sure enough, Parks. So we're landing. Thank Christ for that. We're in an aeroplane, got no panel lights, so Jim's got a torch half the time. I'm flying, Jim's watching the gauges and stuff. And we land at Parks and thought, thank Christ for that. So next thing he says, the pumps are over there. I said, well, why don't we do that in the morning? No, we're going to keep going. We're going to fill it up. We'll go to Sydney tonight. So, bugger that, Jim. Are you sure? Yeah, no, we're right. I've got another job to do tomorrow. So anyway, fill her up, flew into Sydney there. We landed at Kempsey, and he had a little strip alongside his house, and his wife put a couple of vehicles out on the edge of the strip, and he charged in there, landed. Don't think we talked to anybody the whole way.
Balls of steel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it was. But anyway, it became REN, which I'm not quite sure where it is now, but I understand it went to sort of Kaikoura area on a farm, and I heard it got broken, so I'm not quite sure where it is now.
There's been quite a few missions overseas collecting aeroplanes. You got into Beavers, of which you've done 8.
Yep.
But in 1993, you went to Vietnam on a sort of an aircraft and parts recovery mission to collect some apparent beavers over there.
Yeah, well, that's right. I met an Aussie fellow whose father lived in Vietnam, and this is in 1994. So the Americans were still banned from Vietnam at that stage. So anyway, we talked about beavers, and this supposed father said, "Oh yeah, there's beavers over here. I've seen them over here." So we went on this buying group tour, and we only found one beaver, and I think it had been in the tide because I've never seen anything corroded so badly. Anyway, it was sitting at an airport called Bien Hoa in Vietnam, so we walked away from that straight away, and we looked at F-5 Freedom Fighters and the big attack aircraft, which are I'm trying to think of that bloody name now. And there was just gear everywhere because the Americans had basically, when they pulled out, they just walked away. They walked away from machine shops and turbine facilities, and it was just like they'd left yesterday. And the Vietnamese were supposedly wanting to sell stuff, but we were being guided around there by a guy who had done his a guy that had done his training in Russia. So he was a Vietnamese supposed captain or something that had trained in Russia, and never did know whether or not we gave him any money, we'd ever see anything back. So long story short, we just sort of walked away from it. But the aeroplane I was trying to think about was Sky Raiders, Douglas Sky Raiders. And it would have been a lovely project. They had one there that could actually be taxied, and they wanted $10,000 for it. But it's such a huge airplane, it won't fit in your container, and I'd probably still be working on it if I hadn't bought one. But yeah, it was interesting to be there once again after a war situation, and we went through the tunnels and all the things that all the tourists do today. But
Yeah.
interesting place to visit. Didn't go to the north, unfortunately. I'd like to do that one day.
Right. And you've done a couple of trips to India.
Yeah, went to India and bought we managed to, we went up there looking for beavers again. Beavers were advertised worldwide with 3 of them, two that had been flying and one that had crashed. So it was 2.5 airplanes. And we met the chief engineer who sort of sidled up to us on day one and said, "Well, Mr. Frank, if you give us some $1,000 US, I'll make sure that you're the successful tenderer." So we thought, oh, well, that's worth a gamble. So we did that, and obviously he must have done that to about 3 other people, I think. But they ended up at Kenmore Air Harbor in Seattle, Washington, and they obviously did better than we did. But an interesting place to visit again.
Yeah, yeah. And you went a second time to tender for 33 Pawnee Braves.
That's right. When
copies.
When we were there chasing the beavers, we noticed there was 30 of these. They looked like a copy of a Piper Pawnee Brave top dressing aircraft. And we knew they were there, and we wondered about them. When we got back to New Zealand, I understood at the time that all the Fletchers, which were running the 8-cylinder 720 engine, they couldn't get crankshafts for them. So I thought, oh, here's a go. All those 30 airplanes have got a Continental 8-cylinder engine in them and a 3-blade propeller on the front. So anyway, we put a tender in on the whole 30. They came back to us a couple of months later and said, "Oh no, you need to tender more money." We said, "No, that's it, forget it, goodbye." And anyway, they came straight back and said, "Okay, you're the successful tenderer." I took 5 guys with me up there, and we pulled them apart, cut the firewalls, or the engine mount at the firewall, swung the engines out, put them on pallets, and we ended up with 2 40-foot containers full of aircraft.
And just brought the engines back.
Yeah, and we walked away from the fuselages. And when we did the tender, I put a clause in the thing to say that anything that we didn't want, we could leave there for whoever to take command of. And of course, when they saw us cutting the engines off the front, they say, "Well, what about the airplanes?" I said, "Don't want the airplanes." And you must take everything. I said, "No, read the fine print."
Bloody Kiwis.
Yeah. So anyway, the scrap dealer would have done well out of them. But they had a steel spar of all things, and that was the problem. They could only carry a couple of hundredweight, and they were stuck. Just didn't have enough puff, even with that big engine on the front.
So what'd you do with all the engines?
Well, we got them all back into New Zealand, and when we went to cross the wharf at Tauranga Port with the containers, a inspector stuck her head, it was a woman, stuck her head in the container, and she found some monkey shit and some bird feathers in there. And she decided in her wisdom that all this stuff needed to be pulled out, steam cleaned, and then she would allow them to go off the port. But I went down to the port with them, and they're hosing these things out with steam cleaning stuff, which I had to pay for. But the same stuff they're hosing out of the containers is running down the drain and into the Tauranga Harbour. So we couldn't really see what the problem was. But they did us a favour in a way, because now there's 30 engines sitting in a neat row in my hangar on pallets. And so I advertised them worldwide, and all the New Zealand operators of the Fletchers that had them, nobody wanted to buy the firewall forward package. They all wanted to buy just a crankshaft. And I said, no, there's the engine, propeller, crankshaft, everything, starter, motor. $30,000 each is what we were asking for them. And so we didn't sell one to New Zealand. An American guy came down. He said, well, first of all, he called me and said, you got the guy that got those engines? I said, yep. He said, you want to sell them? I said, yes. And he said, oh, I'll be down next week. Came down, counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 30. Right, here's the price. Good. And then I had to turn around and put them all back in the containers, ship them up to him. So, yeah, so we did very well out of that deal.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories. Couple of other miscellaneous stories. You went on you were at Oshkosh and did a Concorde flight.
Oh, we did, yeah. Kay and I were up there, and the announcement came that there were 2 Concordes coming to visit the air show while it was on, and that if anybody wanted to take a ride in one, they were going to do a local flight of 45 minutes, and they were going to go from Oshkosh up to the Canadian border and back down again, and it was $700 per person. And I said to Kay, I said, look, we're never going to be able to afford to fly on this thing on a schedule, so why don't we have a go at this? So we put our name down. They said, no, one of the aeroplanes has gone US, so now we've got too many subscribers, and this went on for a couple of days, and then finally the phone went one day and they said, no, a couple of people pulled out, and there's 2 seats there if you want them. I said, yes, done. So we jumped on this big thing. It was just amazing.
What was the acceleration like on takeoff?
You know, if you wanted to get out of your seat on the takeoff, you couldn't get out anyway. You know, you didn't need a seatbelt on takeoff. It was just huge, and it was like you were in a controlled explosion in a way. There's just the whole thing was just vibrating, and it was very narrow. There was 2 seats this side and 1 seat this side, and an aisle sort of off center, but very tiny. And I'm only 5'4" sort of thing, and I can only just get in under the tunnel. So like you feel like you're crawling into an aluminium tube, but it was pretty exciting.
Amazing experience. I was watching a YouTube video recently by a Concorde pilot. His name is John Ty, and he was telling what it was like to fly it. But one thing I never knew is that delta wing doesn't develop lift like a traditional wing as the aeroplane's taking off. Right. So on a normal aeroplane, as you're rolling down the runway, the wing starts developing lift and obviously starts taking the weight of the aeroplane. But on the Concorde, it doesn't. He said it develops no lift at all on takeoff until they rotate the nose.
Until they pick the nose up.
Yeah, so that's why he said every takeoff is full power. They never do reduced takeoffs to get up to about 200 knots. Yep. Then they raise the nose, I think, to 18 degrees, and then it produces these big vortices, and it develops what he called vortex lift. And he said this is how it worked until you got over 250 knots, and then it would start developing lift like a regular wing.
Gee.
Which I'd never heard of before.
Never heard of that, no.
Pretty amazing airplane.
Yeah. God.
Yeah.
No, they're pretty special airplanes.
Another thing, he said, in supersonic flight, it got so hot that the fuselage expanded by 8 inches and the cabin was on rollers. But he said behind the flight engineer's panel, in supersonic flight, you could put your whole hand in this gap that appeared.
Really?
And then when it cooled down, as they slowed down, that gap just disappeared.
Right.
Crazy engineering.
Yeah. It was a shame that one crashed at La Havre, wherever it was, because they'd probably still be going now.
Yeah.
You know, that was just bloody bad luck.
What else? A couple of things I'll just mention in passing. You've had quite a bit of time in motor racing. You designed a new fiberglass racing car body called the Wright V. You've been into yacht racing a lot. You were appointed to the South Island agents for the Nolex 25s.
Yep.
You went sailing on Milford Sound with Peter Blake on Ceramco.
Yep.
Getting back to aviation, there was an interesting incident you had in a 180 where you did a forced landing on the desert road.
Yeah. Kay and I were visiting her parents, who lived in Palmerston North, and it was one Christmas, and we were trying to get back to Tauranga. First day we got as far as Taihape and ran into weather, and so we went back. Next day we got as far as Waihuru. And then the next day after that, we actually got through the high ground, and I thought, oh, well, we got it now. We're downhill from here to Turangi. And just about immediately afterwards, I looked up at upside of Mount Ruapehu, and this great wall of cloud just came pouring down the hill, which is really on the lee side of the hill, so I don't know what was going on. But this thing just came down toward us, and we started flying around in ever-decreasing circles, waiting for this thing to dissipate, and it didn't. And in the end, I subconsciously, more than anything, said to myself, well, I'm in the shit here a bit. And Kay said, what'd you say? And I said, oh, no, I said, it's going to be a bit tighty. I'm going to have to put it down on the ground here. And I said, just hang on, do your belt up tight, because, we might trip over a tussock or something in here. Anyway, I found this little bit of road and plonked it down and managed to stop okay. The dog's still sitting in the back looking out the window, so she was worried more about the dog than the aeroplane or me. But anyway, we thought, well, I said to Kay, I said, we'll just wait here for an hour or so, and that front will go through, and we'll carry on. Well, 3 days later, we got out of there, and luckily that evening, a couple came along in a station wagon with their kids, and said, what are you guys doing up here? And we told him this whole story. And he said, well, why don't you come down to our camp, stay with us tonight, and tomorrow we'll organise to get you out of here, which is exactly what they did. And he went out and made a phone call, and our relatives came to pick us up, but we were there for 3 days. So, yeah, so the desert roads, there's a lot of desert there, but most of it's aeroplane tripping up stuff.
Yeah. A few final questions for you. You've done so many things in your life that most of us would be a little bit scared to take on. Do you see yourself as cautious or risk-taking in life? And how do you balance, or how have you balanced the risk over the years with all these new ventures? Or is it a conscious process for you, or you just get into it?
No, I'm probably more risk averse now than I was 5 years ago, even. Probably it's just a thing of aging. You just don't take the risks. I mean,
maybe if you think back to your earlier days, did you have a sort of a risk balancing process, or was that Kay's job?
No, it was probably me that did it. But if there was a chance that if you got it wrong, you might hurt yourself, I sort of saw that as a bit of a challenge, like whether it was snow skiing or whatever. Someone said, you reckon you can ski down that face? Well, yeah, I suppose I can. I'll have a go. But I've got to say that, Kay's influence on our whole arrangement and our whole lives together has been because she's able, as I said earlier, to find the fish hooks that I don't see. But the fact is because we don't have any children, we've only had to really look after each other. And if we'd had children, I think our life would have been quite a lot tamer than it was, particularly, in our time together, obviously. But in the early days, it didn't matter because no one was really relying on you that much. And as long as you can make it work without either hurting yourself financially or somebody else financially, then give it a go. And that's probably where it all came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, I got to say that, you know, Kay has been the biggest influence of my life.
Mm.
And, you know.
And a lot of these ventures, as we mentioned, you didn't have the previous skills or experience to do. You sort of talked your way into it.
Yeah.
I'm just interested what your attitude towards the current trend where, you know, if a kid finishes school, very often they don't know what they want to do, so they go to university and get a degree. And then they come out of that and often they don't use it.
Yeah.
What's your sort of opinion on that? Do you think, you know, that's a good thing to do, or should kids be getting into giving something a go and not worrying with that whole wasted university time if they're sort of floating at it, you know?
Well, when I lived in the States, I found up there that the American education system is most kids end up still at school when they're 22, 25 years old, because they go through this college thing, university thing, because that's what everyone should do. But they all end up with either a degree in beekeeping or something completely useless for lifestyle enjoyment. But it's the way the thing is done. And we've ended up now in New Zealand where the kids, because when they do get to school leaving age, they haven't had any direction either from their parents or from their friends and associates. You know, we haven't got enough apprentices being trained in New Zealand now. When I
It's a bit like what your dad said, get a trade.
Right. When I left school, my dad said, I don't mind you leaving school at age 15, 16 or whatever I was, but you've got to have a trade. So I don't care whether it's butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. You're going to have a trade, so you choose. And luckily, in those days, I could have been either of those trades. But today, I've just had a car service the other day, and I said to the guy, how's the business going? He said, it's going good. He said, but I can't get any apprentices. The kids don't want to get out of bed in the morning, don't want to go to work. They want time off for this, time off for that. They're playing sport, but they can't fit in a night school to learn how to, fix a spark plug or whatever. He says, just bloody hopeless. And he said,
and every industry's the same, isn't it?
Yeah, there's just no incentive for kids, because the kids seem to think about a person that fixes drains as a plumber or a drain layer, and I don't want to be a drain layer. Who wants to be a drain layer? But it's a bloody profession, and it's a school job, and you can make bloody good money in it. We've got Kay's sister and her husband are just building a bloody multi-million-dollar house in Palmerston North, and they have the same trouble. The builder, who's recognised as one of the best around, he just can't keep guys on the job because he wants them to start at 7 o'clock in the morning and they finish at 5 o'clock, and that's what we do here. No, I'm not doing that. I'm going to the pub at 5 o'clock.
It's hard to know why we're in that situation, and it's hard to know what the answer is.
I think it's schooling. I think they're spending so much time coddling these kids around. Most of them can't bloody write properly. They can't add or subtract. Half of them can't string a sentence together.
The comment that you said at the end of your book, there's still so much to do and so little time.
Yeah.
Are you running out of puff, or is there still things on your to-do list?
No, I've got to say that since I finished the last project, which was the 206 project, which took 3 years, I've run out a bit of puff. The trouble, if a project like that takes too long, what happens during that time is that the parts that you expected to buy to complete this job have increased 3 times the value. And now suddenly what needs to be done, you have trouble justifying even to yourself, but it's got to be done. And I think that's the thing, is that I have run out of steam a little bit, because after 2 or 3 years on the one aeroplane project, you sort of fall out of love with them a little bit. And you're pleased to see, as soon as they're finished and flying, you think, I'll get it sold and get it out of my sight. I've had enough of that thing. But I'm pretty happy to be recognised as somebody who doesn't do a bad job, and we do everything to a good standard. So.
As a serial beaver rebuilder.
Yeah, serial. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, we've exported beavers from New Zealand into Canada where they built them, and we've never had any trouble at all selling one. I just wish we could have kept one here. We tried really hard to keep the last one here on a syndicate of 4 guys, and when it came time to write the check, there was always some reason that some of them couldn't do it.
One thing I meant to mention was you exported one beaver to Canada and did a trip with Murray Bowes and John Kerr and someone else, I
Peter
think.
Smith, yeah, from Queensland.
Which seems like it. And then you flew it around, put it together and flew it around and then sold it up.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, we put it together in Kelowna at the Kelowna airport there. A guy, Dave Barron, who is the inventor of the Beaver Barron stole, which is a stole kit that goes on the beaver wing. And then the boys came up. John and Murray were living in Hokitika then, and Smithy from Queenstown, and we jumped in it and we flew right up from Kelowna, started in Kelowna and went right up just below the Arctic Circle there, Yellowknife, and across into Alaska. And then the boys flew back to New Zealand, and I stuck around for a while looking for a buyer. And then eventually a gentleman from Connecticut heard about it, and we took it down to Viking Air down in Seattle, and they did a pre-purchase inspection and ticked all the boxes and sold it. So so another beaver, a Wright Air beaver running around the States. Yeah.
Is there a particular aeroplane that you've rebuilt that you are particularly fond of? Maybe you wish you could have kept it, or
most of them now. But probably the nicest one I did that proved to be the guys that bought it were both airline pilots who just flew the backside off it and really enjoyed it, and that was BSP Cessna 180. But I'd like to keep a Beaver too. A Beaver's probably the nicest flying aeroplane, but it's got a big engine on the front and it uses a lot of petrol and it's slow. But,
you did have one for a while, didn't you?
Yeah,
and you used it sort of for trips down to Fiordland. And
we normally every time we finished one, the first thing we did was fly it down to Big Bay and put it in the airplane park and take a picture of it.
Yeah.
But they're a great airplane. But for a private owning airplane, if I had pots of money, I would probably have a 180. Yeah. I wouldn't have a 185. 185 is a totally different airplane in my view. It doesn't do the same things as a 180, although physically it's the same shaped airplane. They're just that little bit harder, a little bit less forgiving than the 180 is really. But they certainly do the work and they'll lift a good load. But
Frank, thanks very much for talking to me. We could go on for hours. I've actually skipped over a lot of my notes.
Oh, that's fine.
It's pretty impressive what you've done in your life, you and Kay. So well done. You've achieved a lot, and it's been great just meeting you and getting to know you a wee bit. So
thank you. Yeah, it's great to have a good partner in life, and I've certainly got one of those. And I'm really happy to meet and talk with you too, because we'll no doubt be talking again quite soon.
Sounds great.
All right, mate.
All right,
all
thank
the
you.
best. Cheers.
So we were just having dinner last night, and a few more stories came out. As they do. As they do, from you and Kay. So I just thought it'd be good just to get them on the record. Yeah, sure. Actually, sorry. We're going to have to start again. What? I forgot to start the audio recorder. Sorry, Frank. Right, we'll start again. All right, be natural like it didn't happen. Right,
this is. You didn't smash my car up like that. Yeah. Didn't happen.
This is take 2. So what we were just saying is that we were out for dinner last night, and there was quite a few more stories come up that we didn't discuss on our interview yesterday.
Exactly.
I think we only probably caught 10% of the stories, but there's a few here that I thought would be quite good to get again.
Sure.
And the first one was regarding a peace offering you had to make to Kay, because you had bought the 300 and you still had the cub, and you had bullshitted her about never going venison hunting, and you did, so you felt a little peace offering was in order.
Yes, I did, and we spent quite a bit of time discussing whether or not we should own a helicopter together. But I assured Kay that it was there for pleasure only and something to add to my flying expertise or otherwise. And so we figured that a nice gift of a 1965 E-type Jaguar to Kay may have smoothed the waters a wee bit, which I think it did. The only thing that owning an E-type Jag seems to amount to, you put it in for a grease and oil change, and it costs you about $500 a visit. So it did cost us a few bob, and other than the fact that I entered it in the Coronet Peak hill climb one year, and unfortunately lost control of the thing right in front of Kay and broadside into a untannelized post, and luckily, because it was sort of 3/4 of the way rotten, it snapped off of the ground. Otherwise, the poor old E-type would have ended up shaped like an L. But
And it sounds like Kay was almost shaped like an L too.
Kay was nearly shaped like an L because she was standing with a crowd of people, and of course everybody's cheering. Kay's got tears running down her face. So,
yeah.
So that was
not of joy,
not a good idea. But that's how we ended up with the E-type. So,
and did she forgive you, or was there a little bit of
no? I think she did. Kay's always been very generous with her forgiveness, and she's been practicing it for so long now that it sort of comes automatically, which is great.
Conversation over the meal table that night was just a bit light, probably, though, was it?
Yeah, it was a wee bit. Yeah, yes, it wasn't my best act.
And then the other thing that we should have mentioned yesterday was at Kaimai Downs at the farm, you had quite a few auctions for the stags.
We did.
That you had raised. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? And also, Tim Wallace used to come along, and there's a great photo of you looking like a bit of a stud with Tim Wallace. Just what happened there?
Well, basically, when we bought the farm in the Kaimais there, it was a rundown sheep and cattle property, and we decided to turn it into a deer breeding unit. We obviously had a lot of deer sitting in Queenstown at that time, so we did a handshake deal with a family of people in Tauranga who were equal partners with us. And we proceeded to fence something like 14 acres of new deer fencing on this property. And also we built a selling complex which contained the deer yarding facilities, and we could seat 300 people in pretty nice comfort in an auction situation. And so we would hold auctions quite regularly, inviting other deer farmers to bring their yearlings or whatever they were selling and run them through the auction. But Kay became the secretary initially of a group of people that formed themselves calling the New Zealand Wapiti Society. There is now another group with a similar name who have progressed quite a lot further from where we ended up. But part of that arrangement was because Tim Wallace highlighted seriously in the New Zealand Wapiti Society. And so he arrived at one of our first big major auction. He arrived in his 210 aircraft, Cessna, and he arrived there with Mike Briggins, another guy that weighed about 150 kilos, and a whole lot of paraphernalia and banners and signs to distribute at the sale. And he landed on a paddock on our farm on the boundary of our place there, and only just managed to pull this thing up to the point that we unloaded the aeroplane. He then proceeded to fly the aeroplane off the strip down to Tauranga Airport, because obviously he wasn't going to get off there with any more than himself in the aeroplane.
Would have been great if he got tangled up at the fence.
That's right, yeah. So anyway, the auction went down really well. It was a big sale. There was lots of food and drink, and as the night wore on, everything got a bit louder, and the boys started arguing over who did what with whom, and all of a sudden there's a bit of a scrap in one corner, and there's two guys rolling around in the pumice floor, and Donna Almanger, another friend of ours from down in Potiki Way, she was in there trying to break them up. Kay was panicking in the background with tears rolling down her eyes. Tim went up to her and said, "Don't worry, Kay. This happens all the time, so don't worry about it." And so everybody settled down eventually, but a good night was had by all, really.
You seem to feature in a lot of these stories with tears rolling down your eyes.
Yeah, yeah, poor old Kay.
Oh no, yeah. Oh no, that's great. They were great stories, and I just thought the last one was good, just to capture a little bit of time.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, Tim to fly all the way up to support our efforts really showed that he like us was convinced that the New Zealand Wapiti breed was the right animal to be farming anyway. So we were very happy to have his support, and he done so much for that industry.
Yeah. All right, very good. We'll let you off the hook now.
All right, thank you.